Almighty God, who, in thy infinite wisdom and providential goodness, has appointed the offices of rulers and councils for the welfare of society and the just government of man, we beseech thee to behold with thy abundant favor as thy servants, whom thou hast been pleased to call to the performance of such important trusts in the Commonwealth of Dominica. Let thy blessing descend upon us here in this parliament assembled, and grant that we may, as in thy presence, treat and consider all matters that shall come under our deliberation in so just and faithful a manner as to promote thy honor and glory, and to advance the good of those whose interest thou hast committed to our church, all which we ask in the name and the sake of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen. House resumes and debate continues. Yes, I recognize the Honorable Dennis Charles. Please proceed.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to make my contribution to the 2022-2023 budget debate. Please permit me to refer to my notes.
Permission is granted.
But before I do so, Mr. Speaker, let me first express our sincere and deepest condolences to my friend and colleague, Dr. King, on the passing of her father. We know that it is never easy to lose a loved one. And Mr. Speaker, despite this challenging time, she is in the house attending to the people's business. Let me pray that the Lord will continue to comfort her and her family and give them strength during their period of mourning. And Mr. Speaker, let me greet my family, my nieces, Taisha Laville and Zendaya Loda, and the youth parliamentarians, especially Rachel Andrew from the Soufriere constituency, who threatened me to transfer to Roseau Central when she heard the expansive plans the Honorable Spirit had for the city. Mr. Speaker, after listening to the opposition's leader, predictably lame response to the 2022-2023 budget estimate, it is abundantly and categorically clear to the people of Dominica that the only party serious about the advancement of our people and our country is the Dominica Labour Party. Mr. Speaker, this was one of the most progressive budgets presented in this House. And what makes this budget stand out? It is happening at a time when revenues are down, wars are ongoing, and the global climate is full of uncertainties. But this government, despite these global woes, which, as the opposition leader rightly said, is out of our control, is still focused, Mr. Speaker, and still, Senator John Finn, this Roosevelt-Skerrit-led administration is on steroids on its quest to build dynamic Dominica and will not relent until we fully deliver on that promise. Mr. Speaker, I have sat in this honorable House for 6 years, and every year, our dynamic Prime Minister delivers a master budget that is responsive to the needs of the people and focused on the transformation of our economy. And in those years, Mr. Speaker, I have listened to the leader of the opposition attempt to rebut one masterpiece budget after another. And Mr. Speaker, every year, I try to find something in his remarks that is relevant, something of substance, something that I can say Here is an idea to uplift the lives of our people. Here is something that can be considered by the government to expand the economy. Or here is something that will increase government revenues. Mr. Speaker, alas, alas, what a pity. But there's a saying that goes that you cannot squeeze water out of stone. So, Mr. Speaker, the member for Marigot is happy to let people know that he's the leader of the opposition. And I have a little story that I'll share at another time. But hardly spends time in the House during the most important debate in Parliament. Then, the first 30 minutes of his budget presentation is to lament on what he considers to be an abuse of power by you, Honorable Speaker, when he was not allowed the same time to present his budget, to present his budget rebuttal last year. He referred to the punishment as draconian. The real question, Mr. Speaker, is how do we deal with members who abuse their privileges and do not take Parliament seriously? And that matter needs to be urgently reviewed by the Privileges Committee. And that is why leadership matters. Leadership is really not about the title, Mr. Speaker. It's about having passion, commitment, and a drive to make a better life for your people. And that is the Dominica Labour Party brand. People first, all shall eat. Yes. So, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister announced in the budget 55 million for agricultural development, focusing on an increase in production of agricultural produce, livestock, horticulture, and fishing, with a clear plan to expand Dominica's market share locally, regionally, and internationally. And the Minister of Agriculture did an excellent job in going into detail about those measures. The opposition leader counter proposal? Nothing. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister announced that the government will make available an additional 5 million to Dexia as a revolving fund for the procurement of agricultural produce, meaning that farmers will no longer have to wait 2 or 3 weeks to be paid by Dexia. They'll be paid in a matter of days. The opposition leader response? Nothing. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister announced 5 million to commence the innovative Future Housing Program for young professionals. Mr. Speaker, when I think of the excitement of the young people that I met at the Future Housing Program launch, I can say undoubtedly that it was one of my proudest moments of being in government. And by God's grace, we shall build many homes to give our young people a hands up in life, especially those who made the decision, who made the sacrifice to return or remain in Dominica to build this beautiful country. Mr. Speaker, according to some of the young people on the government's advisory team, the average cost of owning a 3-bedroom home, house and land, is about 500,000. Today, the government is taking on the risk, relieving our young professionals of all the stresses associated with building their homes. And at the end, one receives a key to his or her new home. Instant savings and equity, Mr. Speaker, because of the subsidy. Mr. Speaker, this is a deal of a lifetime for the youth. The opposition leader's response? Nothing. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister announced in the budget a 50% reduction in the motor vehicles licenses on public service vehicles and trucks and dumpers available for hire up to July 2023. A savings of $470 to bring some relief to taxi drivers, especially because of the high fuel cost. The opposition leader response? Nothing. And Mr. Speaker, they can laugh because running an economy is a joke to them, Mr. Speaker. It's a joke. But this is serious business. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister announced an increase in the number of VAT-free units from 100 kilowatts to 150 of electrical energy provided by DOMLEC to domestic consumers for billing period, and removal of VAT on fuel surcharge to reduce the cost of electricity. We all know how people have been bawling of the increase in electricity prices recently. I know my friend Pamela Delson from Galio is very happy about this measure. The opposition leader's response. He said that we should make the measure retroactive, as if government is holding VAT revenues in a savings account or fixed deposits. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to ask him, where should we take the money to reimburse? Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister announced that the government has entered into an agreement for the operation of a medical school, the American Canadian School of Medicine. This is certainly good news for the people of Portsmouth to rekindle steady economic activity in the north. The opposition leader's response? Nothing. He was actually laughing while the Prime Minister was speaking. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister announced that the maximum that anyone has to pay for replacement of title is $5,000. Just yesterday, Mr. Speaker, I met some Dominican nationals abroad, who are celebrating their high school reunion in Dominica, Mr. Speaker. And they were asking me about the budget. And I told them about the measure for pleasure craft, and they was like, yes. But Mr. Speaker, when I mentioned the reduction in fees for land title transfers, one of them said, yes, this government is working. And she told her friends that she has 3 lots to transfer. So as of today, as of now, all drinks on her because of the savings she's going to realize because of this measure. The opposition leader's response? Nothing. Mr. Speaker, where are the alternatives? Where are the next best options? I mean, the opposition is well paid in this parliament when one considers the hourly rate based on the hours worked in a year. And nothing? His counter proposal is funds for electoral reform and funds for national security. And I totally agree, Mr. Speaker, that we have to do everything in our power to eradicate child abuse and all forms of abuse from our country. And to curtail crime, I totally agree. But funds are already provided for both in the budget. And my honorable colleague, Minister Blackmore, will respond to that, so I'll leave that for him. And then, Mr. Speaker, he tries to mislead the public on CBI revenues, his favorite subject, like always. To give an impression of missing funds, always up to some voodoo maths, as if these are the days when a former Prime Minister had the checkbook of the CBI program, also known as the Economic Investment Program, in his back pocket. Mr. Speaker, I am certain if my colleagues want to know and learn about the budget estimates, all the estimates are done for CBI revenues, the FS would be willing to give a class. But some people, Mr. Speaker, are just bent on mischief. But this IRS-led Dominica Labour Party administration is not going to be distracted by these malicious tactics. We have been tested, Roosevelt Skerritt. We have been tested by 3 major disasters and numerous UWP man-made disasters. But we are rising above the challenges, seeing beyond the horizon, and embracing all opportunities to deliver Dominica, dynamic Dominica. And Mr. Speaker, by the opposition leader's own admission, our debt to GDP was well managed and only started to increase due to successive major disasters: Erica, Maria, and COVID-19. His own data from the IMF, he quoted, Mr. Speaker. So imagine if we didn't have those disasters, we would have one of the lowest debt to GDP in the world. So I want to ask him, Mr. Speaker, what should we have done? Not rebuild our country? Not relocate Petit Savan and Ubik?
That's right.
Stop the pensions to seniors? Stop the housing revolution? Don't rebuild our infrastructure? Or cancel the NEP? Stop prioritizing health and safety during a pandemic? Or stop sending students to tertiary education, to pursue tertiary education? But Mr. Speaker, despite every crisis, even if delayed at times, we are delivering on our promises to our people and on our way to build the first climate resilient nation. And Mr. Speaker, out of the blue, the opposition leader remembers the youth and states that he would establish a 100 million youth investment fund, despite the fact that investments in youth have been the most significant under the Dominica Labour Party administration. How many youth studied under the United Workers' Party? It's either you could go to Cuba, get a loan, or that's it. There was no government paying your tuition. But since he said he received the budget estimates late, I think he said on July 26 at 10:25 p.m., I feel obliged to highlight our investments in youth. 500,000 to assist young athletes. 5 state-of-the-art primary schools totaling 14.6 million, and more investments on students studying abroad. 1 million for youth agriculture, an additional 1.5 for the housing under 40 grant, 5 million for investment in value-added enterprises, 1 million for fresh juice production, 500,000 small business grants, 400,000 for the Dominica Youth Business Trust, over 21 million for the Ministry of Youth Affairs, recurrent and capital, 98.2 million investment in the education sector. Not to mention the cross-cutting benefits to the young people, distribution of over 12,000 digital devices to school children, training of 121 young people to improve their digital skills, knowledge, and marketability. And Mr. Speaker, Honorable King mentioned a whole list of other youth trainings when she spoke last evening. The nuclear harbor in Portsmouth, employment for 176 young people. Future housing program, 5 million. The establishment of an Olympic-sized synthetic athletics track at Point Round. Over 6 million in sporting facilities. So, Honorable Linton, the youth are not marginalized in Dominica. As you can see, the Dominica Labour Party administration youth investments far exceeds your $100 million. And Mr. Speaker, there will be many more investments from public and private sector partnerships that will create more jobs for our youth. I met some investors the other day, and they were saying that you can just smell it in the air, that Dominica is ripe for investment. A country, Mr. Speaker, brought to its knees by Hurricane Maria under 5 years ago. And that is why, Mr. Speaker, my mission as Minister for Tourism, International Transport and Maritime Initiatives is to ensure that tourism contributions to GDP doubles within 5 years. Tourism is measured by two things: total visitor arrivals and total spend. In 2019, according to the World Tourism and Travel Council, tourism and travel contributed $510 million to GDP. So doubling tourism economic contribution is feasible. Many might wonder how it will be possible, Mr. Speaker. I want Dominicans to know that people are just beginning to discover Dominica. Mr. Speaker, our vision is to create a world-class sustainable tourism product. And one silver lining that came our way, based on reports by the World Tourism and Travel Council, is the change in desires of travelers, many of whom have become more environmentally and health conscious and want to feel connected to nature. And what better place than Dominica to do so? So we repositioned our industry by implementing the 5-pillar strategy: adventure, aqua, acro, health and wellness, and events and festivals. Mr. Speaker, we also reimaged our destination by launching our bold new logo, which has received rave reviews on the national, regional, and world stage, Mr. Speaker. Everyone is in firm agreement that it captures the essence of the nature island, and it boldly distinguishes from Dominican Republic. But interestingly, Mr. Speaker, I don't recall my shadow minister writing an article about that. I have a shadow minister in the house. And this year, Mr. Speaker, we are focused on establishing 2 new pillars: Kalinago Tourism Pillar and Romance in Nature. Dominica is a serene paradise for couples to get married, enjoy their honeymoon, celebrate their anniversary, and simultaneously reducing their carbon footprints. Just picture, Mr. Speaker, the Trafalgar Falls viewing platform transformed into a beautiful venue with the Twin Falls as the backdrop. I know my colleague, Dr. Daru, already cited the Kana Heritage Park for his wedding venue, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, the Kalinago Pillar, Kalinago Emenchire, I got it right? Or the Kalinago Experience, aims to enhance the tourism product of the Kalinago territory, provide opportunities for the Kalinagos to benefit directly from the tourism product, and market the Kalinago Experience as a main highlight of Dominica's unique offerings. And all these pillars are linked to community tourism, so it means that there'll be direct spillover effects for farmers, fishers, vendors, and manufacturers are going to be evident in all impacted communities, just as Honorable Hippolyte of the economic impact of the Egliston Girondale National Flower Show, Mr. Speaker. So we have become more targeted and niche focused, and to effectively feature and promote the products under each pillar, we are in the process of updating our image library. Surveys have shown that visitors have been more responsive to our images of dive, cuisine, and health and wellness. So we'll be expanding our image library in these niches and our new pillars. Mr. Speaker, we had an open call for models, and over 100 people applied. So I'm looking forward to the launch of that project. So for example, Mr. Speaker, under the agro-tourism pillar, one should expect to see farm tours, culinary tours, agro-processing tours, and more. Mr. Speaker, we also reviewed and streamlined our source market representation. We moved from 6 to 4 source market agents so that our campaigns will go after the right people. One for US and Canada, one for the French West Indies, one for the Caribbean, and one for the rest of the world. Mr. Speaker, the French West Indies is a critical source market for us, as 44% of visitors to Dominica in 2019 came from Martinique and Guadeloupe. So we are finalizing our selection of a new agent, so hopefully, because of the relaxation of COVID protocols, we can begin to rebound much faster. In the US source market, we average about 17,500 visitors annually. This year and onwards, because of the direct service, we have set a target of 70,000 visitors from the US. Through June, we have received 23% more visitors from the US, surpassing the same period in 2019. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to let the opposition leader know that the direct flight that he described as an old plane is doing extremely well for our destination. It comes in daily at over 80% capacity, and to date carries 30% of total stayover visitors to Dominica. So I thank the American Airlines team, our regional manager, Kathy and Joseph, and her team for their continued confidence in our destination, even if our opposition had none. So, Mr. Speaker, with the growing international press our destination is receiving, especially our most recent accolade from a major international magazine, Travel and Leisure, as the best island in the Caribbean for 2022. With the best hotel. With the best hotels, Secret Bay, product development, training, and ensuring that small tourism stakeholders have a digital presence will be key areas of focus in this fiscal year. Mr. Speaker, the focus this year is to get all small tourism enterprises to have a digital presence. So when guests Google Dominica, it will be easy to find restaurants, accommodations, and activities. There are so many hidden gems in Dominica, so we'll ensure that they're easy to find. So, Mr. Speaker, we have done a soft launch of the booking platform and will soon do an official launch. We hope to work closely with the Ministry of Digital Economy to ensure that our STEs can be easily found online and are also trained to process digital transactions. For example, we want to empower the Bayfront vendors to have a digital presence so the guests can find them easily, pre-order their gifts whilst on cruise ships, and just collect them on shore. So, Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Tourism will be on the road this year. But, Mr. Speaker, not to march on the Bayfront and the cemetery as some idlers did recently, but to actually get our people ready for the growth of the industry. Further, Mr. Speaker, it is one thing to have a product or service, but it is very important that tourism providers are well trained to deliver quality customer service to ensure that every guest in Dominica becomes a brand champion. The best way to promote the destination is people sharing their stories of the friendliness and kindness of of our people. Our service providers, especially the younger ones, have to understand that service is not equivalent to servitude. And anyone working in the tourism sector must understand that this is not just a job, but one is contributing to the growth of a critical industry. When a guest states on Facebook that in as much as they love the beauty of the country, they shall not be returning to Dominica because of poor customer service or a bad tour experience, that single feedback reflects on our entire destination and may discourage people from coming. Similarly, positive postings of our country will attract more visitors and cause repeat visits. Mr. Speaker, I was talking to the general manager of Kempinski Resorts and Spa, and she's already having many repeat visitors, Mr. Speaker, and she says to me that they are all so excited about Dominica and say that the videos and pics that they saw online do not do justice to the beauty of the nature isle. So, Mr. Speaker, we are focused on ensuring that we establish certified training programs. I must commend GEMS Holding on the launch of their GEMS Foundation and Hospitality School, and Sam Raphael and Jungle Bay for his numerous trainings for our young people. Mr. Speaker, there will be a large focus on training in this financial period. So we are very pleased that $500,000 has been allocated to establish a hospitality institute. Also, we will be partnering with the Ministry of Youth to address critical training needs in specific subject areas of the industry. The first of these will be mixology training in August. And Mr. Speaker, we believe that these investments will certainly keep Dominica the most talked about destination in our region. Mr. Speaker, we recently signed off on our new North American sauce market agent, and after their first familiarization trip, they couldn't stop talking about our sites, beauty, people, and stories of Dominica. They have coined the new U.S. campaign theme, distinctly Dominica, luxury in our nature, or the luxury of nature. So, Mr. Speaker, imagine when we commence the cable car project. This single project has the potential to create 500 temporary jobs and 100 permanent jobs after construction, with an investment of $148.5 million, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have the second largest boiling lake in the world. We should be able to use this gem to promote our destination, Mr. Speaker. There are many of us who would love to go to the destination to see the boiling lake. But because we are of health challenges or other challenges, we cannot hike for 6 hours, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, there are families who would love to take their children to the boiling lake. And I bet people with disabilities would love to have the opportunity to see the boiling lake, Mr. Speaker. Cruise ship passengers will now be able to visit this wonder and will no doubt want to return. So we anticipate that this project will make a marked difference in helping us reach our goal of 1 million cruise visitors. Mr. Speaker, our cruise tourism rebounded nicely in 2021-2022 fiscal year. We had the highest calls in 5 years. And Mr. Speaker, the upcoming season is extremely promising. Over 200 calls are expected, with a total of 280,000 passengers going on tours. I must say, our taxi, tour operators, and vendors had a great season, and we look forward to working with them for the upcoming season. I just want to signal a warning to them. keeping the standards, structure, and discipline we practiced over the last 2 years is critical to ensure a win-win relationship with cruise lines. We have to be more organized and cannot continue price cutting to the detriment or crippling of the industry. Mr. Speaker, visitors on tour experiences are also very important. So I am pleased, Mr. Speaker, with the measure to upgrade coaster buses. And I encourage our taxi tour operators to take advantage of this special facility of 1.5 million at the Aid Bank. The terms will be favorable. Mr. Speaker, feedback from tours are critical in a cruise line's decision to book a destination. So I was elated that the Disney Fantasy made their inaugural call to Dominica, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, it brought back so many childhood memories of Mickey and Minnie, Mr. Speaker. I was so excited. I was feeling like a big kid again. We ensured that they received the true Dominica welcome. Dance, music, silk walkers. It was like a mini carnival. And they felt right at home. Out of the 3,146 passengers, 95% disembarked to enjoy the activities. And 46% went on tours. So imagine the buzz in the city when the Honorable Pilot for Roseau, Honorable Melissa Skerritt, transformed the city with all our wonderful and innovative plans. It shall be this city in the region. So, Mr. Speaker, Minister Douglas did not want to let the cat out of the bag. Mr. Speaker, he just didn't want to let it go. But Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to report that in this year's budget estimates, drum roll, 27.1 million has been allocated to build the marina in Portsmouth. We are certainly ready to take our yachting sector. We are certainly ready to take our yachting sector to the next level. So, Mr. Speaker, our achievement in the tourism sector is not measured merely by capital expenditure. Achievement is measured by results. Results matter. So the people of Dominica can clearly see, Mr. Speaker, in spite of the grave concern expressed by the leader of the opposition, let me assure you that tourism is thriving and will continue to thrive under the Dominica Labour Party administration. In 2021-2022, we tripled stay-over visitors over the last fiscal year, established same-day connections on Silver, Inter-Caribbean, and Windmere, thereby facilitating the bookings of flights on the booking platforms of JetBlue, Delta, United, and British Airways. Commenced new services with Caribbean Airlines to offer connections with Virgin through Barbados and direct flights from Port of Spain, Trinidad. We launched bold new campaigns in Florida, and many of you saw the billboards in the Miami airport. As a result of that campaign, referral traffic from the Miami-Fort Lauderdale metro area saw a 95% increase in sessions to the Discover Dominica site. The Book a Trip button click increased by 47%, while the billboards were in market. We successfully revamped events pillars with special events during Carnival, Jazz and Creole, and soon our most anticipated festival, the World Creole Music Festival of 2022. I know many people are waiting to hear the lineup. Wait for it, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, We prudently managed our resources in a COVID environment when health and safety was a primary focus. And so, member of Marigot, what was that show, Mr. Speaker, he once had, Between You and Me? Between You and Me. Between You and Me. Most of our spend in tourism is under the recurrent budget. But going back to the capital expenditure, Mr. Speaker, we had many plans for upgrades and remedial works at our top sites. But for some of our top sites, repairs just no longer cut it, Mr. Speaker. It is time for modern facilities. So soon, the architect competition will be launched for 5 sites: Trafalgar Falls, Emerald Pool, T2 Gorge, and Monbruce in the first instance. Mr. Speaker, one of our most demanded products in Dominica is the Whitey Kubuli National Trail. We are all aware of the havoc that Hurricane Maria caused on that trail, but I'm happy that the Cabinet has approved the contract for the audit and restoration of our national trail, and the establishment of a task force for the National Site and Trail Authority to develop the policy for management of all our sites. Mr. Speaker, I also look forward to the continuation of the National Beautification Program, as the PM mentioned. We have already started in Champaign and Roseau Valley. The next phase is the Eo-Libla Highway and the North Road, planting trees and plants for beautification, conservation, reforestation, and food security. I'm sure many of you have seen what a difference landscaping and beautification has made at the Douglas Charles Airport. So I want to encourage all parliamentarians, instead of spending hours on Facebook or on Q, spreading negative energy, to roll up their sleeves and lead the beautification campaigns in their respective constituencies. And Mr. Speaker, I am warning those who like to indiscriminately dump garbage. We are reviewing legislation because, in my personal view, and that is my opinion, anyone found dumping rubbish on the road and just leaving derelict vehicles on the road side should be fined no less than $10,000. Public education and campaigns will continue, but every Dominican must make a concerted effort to keep our country clean and beautiful. And if people want to disregard our laws, they must pay. Mr. Speaker, one critical component of our responsible and sustainable tourism vision is locally manufactured goods and services. Mr. Speaker, the last budget, the Prime Minister launched a one-stop shop for small businesses. I must report that over the last fiscal year, the Small Business Support Unit remained one of government's pillars of strength, providing ongoing support to SME sector. So what's happening in the Small Business Unit, Mr. Speaker? We have gone digital. New website, Small Business Support Unit online appointment system, MSC live chat, in addition to traditional forms of contact. Last fiscal year, we provided technical support to over 500 clients, trained 81 beneficiaries in subject areas such as business planning, business legalities, customer service, accounting, marketing, financial planning, product standards and testing, sales and negotiations, export marketing, and business continuity plan, which is very important in terms of when a disaster occurs. 142 small businesses received over $1 million in grants. Of this amount, 22 were funded by the UNDP Future Tourism Program, and I want to thank the UNDP for their partnership. We created the value-added product catalog in collaboration with the Ministry of Blue and Green Economy. The first edition of this catalog is meant to promote all products which can be derived from coconuts. For the new fiscal year, a keen focus will be placed on transforming the MSME sector. That is a targeted approach to ensure that our work at the Small Business Support Unit results in the graduation of micro businesses to small and small businesses to medium. We want to grow business ideas into viable startups, bring our cottage-level businesses to the shelves of major supermarkets, and make our small business products export ready. I will never stop boasting of our amazing, healthy, unique products which are made right here in Dominica. We have recognized that there are specific enterprises in Dominica which have the potential of playing a broader role in our development in terms of value added. Therefore, the $6 million in this budget is allocated to support enterprises which have value-added products. So for example, Frampton's Delight, who produces flour from breadfruit, dasheen, sweet potatoes, cassava, plantain, banana, and pumpkin, will be able to double his production and add 3 persons to his current staff of 3. He will also increase his demand for raw materials from our farmers. Sister Nats, for example, makes all natural snacks, breads, and pastas, and a passion for ensuring that there's a healthy alternative to all the carbohydrates that we enjoy. Investments in a business will take her tasty products to the shelves so that it will be just as easy to make pumpkin bread and cassava lasagna. She also has a program training young people, especially young high school dropouts, Mr. Speaker, first creating jobs. For the creative subsector, art, fashion, jewelry, leatherwork, for example, more attention will be placed on the formalization and marketing of these products. JD Naturals, who has won so many awards and prominently featured in many magazines, can boost local production and exports. Our essential oil producers, time to take production to the next level. And Mr. Speaker, we have taken the approach of using our
14 more minutes. 14 more minutes.
I probably need about 15. We have...
We're giving an additional 10 minutes, 15 minutes to conclude a 15 now, 1-5 to conclude a contribution.
So, Mr. Speaker, the investment...
Honorable Minister, we need a seconder. It has been moved and seconded that the Honorable Dennis Charles be received an additional 15 minutes. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. Honorable Minister, you are given an additional 15 minutes.
So, Mr. Speaker, the investment by the government will provide the capital backing and foundation for growth. But to be truly and wholly successful, individual citizens, companies, hotels, investors, vendors, and even the public sector must choose Dominican-made products. So I'm calling on all citizens to demand and choose Dominican products and invest in Dominican businesses. So, Mr. Speaker, when we go to a restaurant to have lunch, for example, and you want some pepper sauce, Mr. Speaker, we must demand that the pepper sauces, given that we have so many producers of pepper sauce, be Dominican-made, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the ministry will be hosting what we hope will be the largest business-to-business forum in Dominica, which aims to strengthen backward and forward linkages. The small business B2B aims to provide a platform for small businesses to showcase their products to markets and investors, and provide a platform for markets and investors to learn about newly locally made products. Small businesses involved in agro-processing, manufacturing, value-added products, creative industries, and other subsectors can now register for their spaces on the small business website. I am also inviting our hoteliers, vendors, restaurants, spas, supermarkets, and exporters to this important event which we intend to host annually. This is one of the many activities that the ministry has planned for August, which we have called Small Business Month. This year, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has gone one step to reaffirm the responsibility of issuing fiscal licenses to the small business unit from the IDA. So, Mr. Speaker, Terry Henry of B Natural, who needs to order refined, fractionated, or MCT coconut oils, can apply for a special license to do so. A simple application form can be completed and submitted to the small business unit. The team will conduct an assessment, including interview and site visit, and submit the recommendation. Once approved, the fiscal license will be presented to the enterprise, who will submit their master list of imports for processing. Simple as that. Mr. Speaker, the possibilities of transforming micro to small, small to medium are endless. And coupled with the 1.5 million to build a central processing plant, I have dubbed this budget the wealth multiplier, as it is a farmers and MSMEs' dream budget aimed to multiply their wealth. And Mr. Speaker, with the marked increase in production and exports expected, the international airport and development of our ports is a must. Mr. Speaker, since the hurricane season commenced, we have had some cancellations and some flights being temporarily redirected. So whilst we are considering measures to reduce these occurrences, it further highlights that the international airport is not a want, Mr. Speaker, but a need. So, Mr. Speaker, I am kindly asking the opposition to end this debate on the international airport. Let's not waste time on which site is or was the best. Reports have shown that this UWB site would have been a glorified version of the Douglas Charles Airport, Mr. Speaker, with twists and turns. It is not me, Mr. Speaker, who is saying so. It's the reports by the experts. This new site has a clear, precise, and unobstructed path for landing. It will fully meet the ICAO standard of 95% usability with full instrument landing capability. But really, Mr. Speaker, this isn't about UWP or the Dominica Labour Party. This is about Dominica and having the safest site for airlines to operate. So let's not come to the house and act as aviation experts. Let's stay in our lane. The Eastern Caribbean Civil Aviation Authority and the International Civil Aviation Authority have already given us thumbs up on our master plan. What we all should do now is promote our country and our CBI program so we can raise all the funds needed to build the international airport. And Mr. Speaker, the airport runway is not 10,000 feet. It is 9,350 feet. It is being built for aircraft as large as the Boeing 777 or Airbus A350 to land. So the Airbus A220-100, Mr. Speaker, which is in limited supply. Let me just inform the opposition leader. It is in limited supply based on the Airbus June 2022 report that the A220-100 orders, aircrafts on order, 104, deliveries 55. But Mr. Speaker, it will still be able to land. as well as the larger aircrafts. This is one project that should be bipartisan. One project, Mr. Speaker, that we should unify on. It shall benefit all of us. So stop the negativity on this critical and transformational international airport project. Please, please. In the meantime, Mr. Speaker, to improve guest experiences and safety at our ports, we have done the following. Open the executive lounge at the Douglas Charles Airport, increase seating space within the terminal by 50%. Now we can safely accommodate 150 passengers in the departure lounge. We started an X-ray scanning by customs and DASPA officials before cargo is transferred to designated storage area. Rehabilitated sections of the Roseau Ferry Terminal. Rehabilitated the Rosa cruise ship berth reception area. Procured a new non-directional beacon for Douglas Charles and a new distance measuring equipment, DME, a total cost of EC 1.2 million. The non-directional beacon is a radio transmitter used as a navigational aid. It emits a signal and points to a path that an aircraft can follow with predefined routes to complete a flight plan. The distance measuring equipment will be used to calculate the distance between the aircraft and ground station. Both pieces of equipment are critical for improving safety and the confidence of pilots, and therefore reduce cancellations. They should be installed by September 2022. So, Mr. Speaker, as you can see, this government is getting things done. The only balling taking place right now is that people cannot believe that Senator John Thien requested compensation for her inconvenience because of the Bois Diab road project. Progress killers, shameful. Mr. Speaker, I must commend our champion, the Honorable Prime Minister, for his total commitment to building a prosperous nation. My right hand in the ministry, Honorable Shakira Hippolyte, together we are moving things forward. I want to thank my hardworking Energizer PS, Miss Lisa Valmont. Mr. Speaker, she keeps going and going. The CEOs of DASPA, DDA, and IADC for their invaluable support, and their respective teams for their commitment and diligence in getting things done. Our tourism task force and stakeholders for their partnerships and recommendations. And Mr. Speaker, I save the best for last. The beautiful and loving and hardworking people of the Soufriere constituency. And all these interventions are going to benefit my constituents, my farmers, fishers, agro-processors who make creams, oil, arts and crafts, bags. I have this young man from Point Michel, Cameron, who makes beautiful sandals. Mr. Speaker, in housing, we have already started 16 homes in Savannah, Scott said, all being built by local contractors.
That's right, Dennis.
16 more will soon commence in Point Michel by local contractors. And Mr. Speaker, we are searching for lands in Soufriere, but we have some people that have their own plots, so we'll soon build some homes in Soufriere and Galio. Mr. Speaker, our state-of-the-art health and wellness center is in use, and the people are very happy. In infrastructure, the Lord Bob Bridge in Point Michel is complete by grant funding, Mr. Speaker. Roads by council in Soufriere progressing nicely. Thank you, Honorable Laville. And the long-awaited section, broken section of the Soufriere Scott said wall will be built this year, Mr. Speaker, will be repaired this year. Mr. Speaker, our multi-purpose court in Point Michel, and one of your partner with me, should be completed this month, Mr. Speaker. And the Brooklyn playing field, Mr. Speaker, we are rehabilitating it, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, what a glorious sight it will be when that job is completed. I must also commend Mervyn Matthew from the Soufriere constituency, who was MVP for the Dream 11 T10 League, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have other projects: fishing processing plants, slipways for fisher folks, funding for St. Mark Preschool, which was destroyed by Hurricane Maria. And Mr. Speaker, I must commend some of our students, the valedictorian of St. Martin's Secondary School, Yachela Regis from Point Michel, Vashanti Luis and Rohana Martin for graduating with honors at the Dominica State College. So, Mr. Speaker, the Soufriere constituency is on a journey of transformation in every sector. I must thank my constituency staff, associations, my NEP supervisors and my NEP teams, my development partners, the Socioeconomic Association for their incredible support. So, Senator John Finn, this government is not a dream killer, but has and is empowering Dominicans of all walks of life to move up. And after this forward-thinking budget, Mr. Speaker, I see many Dominican national broads wanting to return home to invest and live. So, Senator John Finn, even if it is your greatest desire, because you dislike this government so much, Dominica shall never become a wealthier state in this region. Dominica is on a rise to her greatest days. In seasons like this, according to the Bible, the goats will be separated from the sheep.
They have already been separated.
Those who want to progress and those who want to talk about progress. Those who want to build and those who want to destroy. Those who want to produce and those who do not want to work. Those who want to improve their quality of life and those who want to complain about everything. Those who want their hands up and those who walk with their eyes closed. There shall be a clear distinction, separation between those who are committed to building a dynamic economy and those who remain enemies to progress. But like Nehemiah, the wall was built despite the idle chatterers, opposition forces. Just so, Dominica shall keep rising. So I urge all members of this house to be wise and let us get every constituency to be more productive. I thank the Lord for the light over our land, the new opportunities today, and even those ahead. Glory, glory be to his holy name. I declare and decree that this budget, once approved, will be fully implemented, Mr. Speaker. In Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Mr. Speaker, plenty things are happening, and it is so exciting. And with these few words, Mr. Speaker, I want to say, Kone Konla, Song the Kong Shell. But Mr. Speaker, let us have a safe and enjoyable weekend as we support the Kadas Lipso Tribute Festival and Fete Maho, Mr. Speaker. And finally, Mr. Speaker, with these few words, I fully endorse the 2022-2023 budget estimates.
Yes, I recognize the Honorable Attorney General. Proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I support the 2022-2023 budget, and no. I'm fine. Mr. Speaker, I support the 2022-2023 budget, and I shall make a short contribution to this debate. Much has been said, and pretty much every area has been covered by one contributor or another on this side, and there are a few more to go. I'm sure they will cover every other aspect. Mr. Speaker, it is unfortunate and sad, really, that yet again we saw a response to the budget presented by the Honorable Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, and the presentation did not reach the level that one would have hoped in a democratic society where it's a two parties running, and one expects that the opposition would be presenting a viable alternative. The presentation that was presented here in response to the budget, which was presented by the Honorable Minister for Finance and Prime Minister, is woefully inadequate. Mr. Speaker, the first half, perhaps, of that presentation was spent dealing with issues of no relevance to anybody whatsoever. Indeed, from my observation where I sit here, it appears that the attempt was to pad the presentation so as to have an equal time of delivery rather than equal substance. We heard references to $100,000 for drones. How the $100,000 came about, what was the rationale for it, one doesn't know. What was the price of an individual drone, what was the number of drones that would be required, and what was the purpose and extent of the usage to be made of those drones. That's just one example, Mr. Speaker. So all in all, Mr. Speaker, the response is what I would term as a fantasy presentation. Totally uninspiring, Mr. Speaker, and totally unhelpful to the development of Dominica and of Dominicans. Yet again, we heard that there wasn't sufficient time to prepare for the presentation. Mr. Speaker, I think every budget that I have been in this House, I have heard that or similar excuse given. The reality, as I understand it, Mr. Speaker, insofar as democratic societies are concerned, is that the party in office will present its budget and prepare, and for obvious reasons, it is a party which is presenting, so it has the knowledge of when it's going to present and exactly what it's going to present in terms of the Minister of Finance. That's obvious, that's a given. What I understand is expected of the other side, or the opposition, is that it presents its alternative budget. So it's irrespective of what the Minister of Finance, in this instance the Prime Minister, but it could be any minister that he should choose, irrespective of what the minister who presents the budget gets up to say. The opposition should have its own budget, its own proposals, its own ideas, its own mode of seeking to give courage, encouragement, and indeed, one may say, inducement to the population to see it as an alternative government in waiting. It's not a question of sitting down and listening to what has been said by the Minister of Finance and then seeking to poke holes in what that person has said without you yourself bringing any useful material to the House and to the nation. So, Mr. Speaker, I think in terms of that, what I will term introduction, that's perhaps enough to be said. There's been a lot said already about it, and I'm sure more will be said. But during the course of the various presentations, in particular from the opposite side, Mr. Speaker, certain key elements that I consider I should probably address arose. One is the issue of child abuse. Well, of course, Mr. Speaker, child abuse and the concern about child abuse is not a monopoly of the opposition. We all, I would hope, in this honorable House are concerned about child abuse, and indeed every type of abuse. But this side of the House, this government, has gone beyond just speaking, Mr. Speaker, and has taken action. In 2016, this government, as a result of its concern, enacted significant amendments to the Sexual Offences Act. taking account of concerns about child abuse and other forms of sexual impropriety. Sweeping amendments, I would say, Mr. Speaker, which had far-reaching implications. And I'm sure that the minister dealing with that particular portfolio will elaborate in due course. But, Mr. Speaker, I keep hearing people talking about legislation. Dominica has an abundance of legislation in virtually every area that you can think of. But sticking with the theme of child abuse and sticking with the theme of child sexual abuse, which has been constantly referred to, if everybody who has to did what they were supposed to do, I believe, Mr. Speaker, that you would not eradicate it because there'll always be divergence, but you would significantly reduce the level of sexual and other abuse in Dominica. In particular, Mr. Speaker, the particular amendments that I just referred to introduced mandatory reporting, a provision, Section 31A of the Act, whereby parents and people in loco parentis, those who are in a parental position as regards minors, those who work in the medical services, nurses, doctors, etc., have a legal obligation to report any suspected case of child sex abuse. It would appear, Mr. Speaker, that that is not being done, or at least not being done at the level that it should be done. There are reports of parents who, after the police have investigated instances of allegations of sexual abuse, and sometimes after the police have instituted charges against individuals, there are reports of parents and others who make approaches and seek to undermine that, and indeed, even at the door of the court, seek to undermine the child giving evidence, or they themselves, where they can give or should give evidence, giving the evidence and support to the case to bring these matters to the conclusion that they should, so that the perpetrators of this behavior can be prosecuted and justice can prevail. My entreaty, Mr. Speaker, is that perhaps the authorities who deal with these matters, that is to say prosecutors and indeed the courts and others involved in the investigatory process and the whole criminal justice process, should become far more robust, far more aggressive with these individuals, so that those who are impeding these prosecutions, are prosecuted to the fullest extent possible, so that the message goes out that somebody offering you a check or whatever it may be is not an excuse for abandoning your child or the child that you are responsible for to the wiles of those who would seek to abuse them. The other area that was mentioned, Mr. Speaker, is firearms. And it's interesting that all of a sudden, members on the other side have arrived at an awakening insofar as the dangers of firearms, in particular illicit firearms, are concerned. And the honourable member has stepped out, so I suppose ordinarily I would not refer to the member if they're not there, but as a choice he has made. The honourable member for Roseau North in particular made certain comments in respect to firearms and the offences, which generally one would agree that we need to prosecute and take those matters seriously. But we cannot be inconsistent, Mr. Speaker. We cannot blow hot and cold in relation to these things. We cannot appear to give succor and comfort to those who engage in those types of activities on one hand, and on some occasions, encouraging nefarious behavior, encouraging people to break the law and to behave in a violent and aggressive manner, and on the other hand, to say that we want to have law and order. We must be consistent. And I hope that we are now at a point where perhaps both sides of the House recognize that in particular, firearms are a danger to the country and to the stability and security and safety of the country, not of those in government only, but of the country and all people. I have always said, Mr. Speaker, and when I sat on the bench as a magistrate, it's one of the things that I often said to those who appeared before me, is that a firearm has one purpose. It was designed to kill or cause serious injury. That's what it's about. That's what it's about. It's not a cutlass that is designed to cut grass and you may use it for some other purpose. It is designed to kill or cause serious injury. And to that extent, Mr. Speaker, there can be no excuse insofar as I am concerned for anybody who is not lawfully or legitimately in possession of a firearm to have one and to have any excuse. What do I mean by that? Mr. Speaker, what I mean is this, that the state has introduced a system whereby it authorizes certain individuals who it considers to have met certain standards to be a person fit and proper to have a firearm. Such a person, the state issues a license to them. That person may forget to renew the license, that's the financial aspect of it, the fiscal aspect. They may forget to pay that on the date that it should be paid. But that is a person that the state has deemed suitable to have a firearm in their possession. That is a wholly different matter, Mr. Speaker, from somebody who has never even presented themselves to the state to be considered whether they are appropriate to have a firearm, but they have that firearm. And in my respectful opinion, Mr. Speaker, a person in that category, a person who has never been legitimated in terms of having a firearm, if they are found in possession of one, in my opinion, the court may deem differ, the starting point should be custody. The question should just be how long. And if and when, Mr. Speaker, the courts take that type of robust position, we may well find that the incidence of possession of firearms by those who are not supposed to have them may well start to decline. The idea of imposing petty fines, especially on those to whom cash is not necessarily a problem, is treated as, I suggest, a hazard of the job. In other words, you take insurance out for your car or for your house. As far as many of those who engage in carrying firearms without being legitimated to do so are concerned, if they get caught and they fine $10,000, they probably pay it and they back out with another one from the supply, and the danger for society continues. These people need to be removed from the streets for a period of time, and hopefully during that period of time they will have a reflection and they will return to society and make a sensible contribution. That's a hope that we have, because as long as we are alive, there is hope for all of us. But, Mr. Speaker, there has to be virtually a no-tolerance policy. It has to be a policy, in my humble opinion, of incarceration. That is what we need to protect our society from the ills and the dangers of people having firearms, often people who are not even properly able to use those firearms, and put all of us at risk, because if we're in the wrong place at the wrong time, whether or not we're the target, we, our children, those we love, friends' children, whatever, can become collateral damage to the events that these people are in. So, Mr. Speaker, that is my unequivocal position on that. I think we have to take a very, very strong line on that, and I am uttering it here, I've uttered it elsewhere, and I will keep uttering it to those who wish to listen, and I hope that attention is paid to it. I saw and heard recently that a quite significant custodial sentence was imposed on someone in possession of a firearm. I applaud that sentence, and I look forward to seeing more like that. Mr. Speaker, we cannot either escape the fact that society as a whole has a responsibility. And Mr. Speaker, it is not enough for us to shirk our responsibility as citizens and put all of it on the police, the prosecution, the courts, to do our job for us. We have to take our responsibility seriously. That involves us giving support to those around us, in particular young people, where we can, to encourage them in the right way, give them advice, give them support. And also, Mr. Speaker, we have to, where necessary, assist the police to take necessary action to remove people who are a danger to society and our peace and tranquility and our enjoyment of the society from the streets. Mr. Speaker, I've said before and I say again, for me personally, as someone who lived for a period out of this country and returned voluntarily, not under the impact of either of the state where I was, but of a conscious choice, Mr. Speaker, and totally not a conscious choice that I would have been standing here today, but of a conscious choice to come back to Dominica as I left to go out, get an education, and improve myself, get qualification, and intending to come back. And I did come back. But, Mr. Speaker, and came back when other Dominicans in the realm that I was of the view that I was somehow losing my mind. But, Mr. Speaker, that also is part of our own shortcomings in terms of our own self-confidence, that we have to, as a people, build ourselves up and build our nation. We have to have more belief in ourselves and what we can do, and to recognize that we are blessed in Dominica with so many things that so many other places don't have, but I guess we don't appreciate it, and we need to start appreciating what we have, Mr. Speaker. We have the beauty, we have a level of tranquility. And Mr. Speaker, that's how I ended up where I am speaking at this point now. Because for me, one of the major drivers in my return was this thing that they call quality of life. That doesn't have a money value. You can't put a money value in it. It is a quality of life, it's an experience, it's an existence. And in Dominica, we have quality of life, and we are in danger of squandering it. I have noticed, Mr. Speaker, over time that we are becoming less concerned about our neighbors or friends, even just the common courtesies that used to exist in my younger days no longer appear to exist. People are largely materialistic and driven by things which are transient and will pass. And if you lose them tomorrow, you still have you and everything that is in you. So, Mr. Speaker, I take the opportunity to try to encourage us as a people, within this House, but also outside more broadly in society, to get back to the basics of courtesy and respect for each other. Simple things, Mr. Speaker, like if you go into park and you can park 5 feet further on or 10 feet further on so that you're not obstructing everybody else, just do it. What's it going to take of you to walk 5 or 10 yards? But it's these little things that I'm noticing, just stopping, parking anywhere, and simply unconcerned about our fellow man and woman, or brothers or sisters, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, another issue that was raised during the rebuttal, if I can call it that, January, is the issue of electoral reform. Now, Mr. Speaker, I cannot believe that there's anybody in Dominica who is not aware that the government has engaged Sir Dennis Byron to undertake an exercise, some describe it as a one-man commission, some use other terms, but to undertake a thorough and complete exercise of reviewing our electoral process and presenting a detailed, comprehensive report with his recommendations as to how we can best institute electoral reform to hopefully benefit our electoral process. So for members on the opposite bench to come to this House yet again with the same old story about electoral reform, creating the impression that there's some resistance or opposition on this side of the House to electoral reform, Mr. Speaker, is really disappointing, to put it in parliamentary terms. If I say what I really think, Mr. Speaker, you will tell me to leave the House, not to withdraw. Mr. Speaker, I'm particularly concerned because I'm well aware of the amount of effort that went into trying to draft legislation to bring about the very same electoral reform that they claim to want on more than one occasion, Mr. Speaker. And I can recall the last occasion when we got right up to the door. We were in this House, Mr. Speaker, with draft legislation, which had been tabled and was just ready to be debated. And what did they do? They amassed their miscreant forces to cause trouble. Bags and bags of stones and other objects to cause disruption. Members of this House had to leave this House through the back door and pass through the President's residence to depart. Mr. Speaker, and so when I hear people standing up and making contributions and claiming in pious voices that they want electoral reform and saying that in the context of a budget which has a line item which addresses an amount towards that self-same thing that they're saying they want. And rather than applaud it, they're trying to use it as a criticism and a judgment and making ridiculous comments. Mr. Speaker, I do get annoyed about it. You know, Mr. Speaker, in that same vein, when we were here, the piece of legislation that was before this House to amend the electoral legislation provided, Mr. Speaker, for identification cards, Mr. Speaker, and not just picture identification cards with a photo and some plastic over it. Mr. Speaker, biometric identification cards with details, individual and personalized details, to make it almost impossible for somebody to impersonate. And it went further. It was providing that that was to be a mandatory requirement to be produced by everybody entering the polling booth, unless, or maybe there were 2 or 3 exceptions, which were in very good place. Somebody who hadn't received a card, or 1 or 2 others. So essentially, it was a mandatory requirement unless you fell within the few exceptions that were provided for. It also provided, Mr. Speaker, for the first time, and to a greater extent than before, for there to be effectively an enumeration, for officers to be appointed to go out into the community and basically do an exercise in identifying people elected to vote, and then there's a corresponding process for others who overseas who were entitled and lawfully to vote to register, so that you would have had, Mr. Speaker, the cleansed list that they claim they want. Mr. Speaker, so far, and it was so complete in providing the necessary requirements, in fact, just for completeness and transparency, the only area that I've heard them talk about now, which seems to be a newer area, it didn't used to get as much attention as they're now giving it, is what they call campaign finance, which they seem not to understand that is a very complicated and intricate issue of finance. And if you bring in campaign finance, I don't know what is going to be said about it, but campaign finance means money must come from somewhere, which means part of it, you either have to say it's come from the Treasury, and so on and so forth. How much do you give and how do you do it? It's not a straightforward issue. That, Mr. Speaker, is the issue that wasn't addressed in that legislation, but all other aspects were addressed. And Mr. Speaker, so much so that the honorable member from Marigot, the leader of the opposition, actually acknowledged on the radio station that he likes to go on, that's Q95, I will say it, he acknowledged in no uncertain terms that the government, these are his words, I'm paraphrasing of course, the government had been trying to introduce legislation to legitimize bribery and cheating. But they have now gone away and they have revised it and they brought back legislation, and this legislation is good for the electoral process. That's what he said. He backtracked after various people gave him pressure on the other side. He backtracked and so on. I can play it, if Mr. Speaker, if you want to have it on my phone. No, I can play it recorded. Yeah? So, Mr. Speaker, the reality is the opposition knows perfectly well that this side of the House has no difficulty with electoral reform. And that this side of the House has taken every reasonable measure that it can take to ensure that we got electoral reform, and is still doing so today. The only blockers, and I await to hear what their response whenever the report comes forward is recommended, the only blockers are the opposition, Mr. Speaker. And the reason, in my humble opinion, they're doing so is because they want to have an issue to keep ringing a bell on, to claim that there is some concern in Dominica insofar as the electoral process is concerned. And Mr. Speaker, that leads me to a comment that's made by our members on the other side. In particular, the Honourable Member for Roseau North, who has scurried off and is not prepared to sit in the House and hear what may be. I would always be gentle with him, Mr. Speaker. I know him for a long time. I knew his brother very well, his deceased brother. Probably was one of the last people to speak to him before he met his untimely demise. So, you know, I always have a soft spot for him. But, Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Member for Roseau North stood up there, talked about the CCJ, and he chose not merely to bring in the Attorney General, but to bring in somebody, Mr. Speaker, called Levi Peter. So Mr. Speaker, I'm sure you'll permit me, I will not say everything, but I'm sure you'll allow me to say one or two things. Mr. Speaker, the CCJ recently ruled on a matter which let's call the election petition matter in relation to the December 2019 elections. The opposition brought election petitions, as they are entitled to do by law, challenging the results in 10 constituencies. The matter went to the High Court, as it's supposed to do according to the law and the Constitution. The High Court judge heard the matter, and as part of that legal process, applications were made to strike out those petitions because, as with virtually every petition they have filed in their existence, they have failed to meet the standards that are required. Almost every petition, I mean, Mr. Speaker, one election, you file petitions. You know, okay, you don't really understand the thing and so on. You file the petition, you don't quite get it right and so on. Okay, they throw it out. They tell you to throw it out because you're not particularizing sufficiently the allegations that you're making. You come to the next election, you do the same thing, it gets thrown out again. You come to the next one, you do it, it gets thrown out. So don't you learn at some point? And, Mr. Speaker, on this occasion, they took a St. Kitts case with a whole set of allegations. This is my version. And I always hear people say, you know, it's opinion, my opinion, you can say. So everybody else has an opinion, I think I can have one too. Now, my opinion, they took a St. Kitts case called Brantley with a whole set of allegations that was quite successful and decided, okay, we'll try that. And put in all those things and come and file that and brought that in. And what happened? It got struck out. All 10 petitions were struck out in the High Court. Yet again, Mr. Speaker, that's the 2019 election. After how many goes at getting it right? They went to the Court of Appeal as they're entitled to do. Again, applications were made to the Court of Appeal on the basis that they had no right to go to the Court of Appeal based on the law and the Constitution. The Court of Appeal upheld the submissions made on behalf of the respondents, i.e. those on the government side, and the Court of Appeal said it had no jurisdiction, which indeed it had no jurisdiction according to the constitutional law. They took the unusual step of going to the CCJ, the Caribbean Court of Justice, because ordinarily the approach had been, and the convention and established wisdom was that the Court of Appeal was the end of the road in relation to election petition matters. They went to the CCJ, and to the extent that the CCJ took the view or expressed the view that in fact it does have the jurisdiction to hear certain matters, one may say that they were successful. But the CCJ, Mr. Speaker, was very clear in its judgment that the Court of Appeal was entirely right to conclude it had no jurisdiction, and therefore it dismissed the application for leave, special leave, from the petitioners. That was the ruling of the CCJ, and indeed, the only issue the CCJ had to consider was that. Mr. Speaker, I think it's important because much has been said about this, and the government issued a statement in respect to it, which generated much discussion. The Attorney General also made a statement on DBS, which probably did not garner as much attention. But the Attorney General expressed his view in perhaps quiet terms in that 7 a.m. contribution with Curtis Matthew. Those who are interested can go and try to find it. I don't know where it is because I don't tend to look for those things once I do them, but it's there. But, Mr. Speaker, the significant thing is this, that, and let me just try to find it, if you bear with me. The court said...
You need to tell us exactly which document you're quoting from.
Mr. Speaker, I will do so once I find
Yes, no problem.
the passage that I want to refer you to. I'm looking at, just in the meantime, I'm looking at the judgment. Judgment of the CCJ. It is, for the stenographers, purpose of the stenographers, it is CCJ application number DM/A/CV 2021, that's 2021/002. Glenroy Coffey and others, and Melissa Skerritt and others is how I will term it for the purpose of the exercise. And it says the critical issue in this appeal is whether the Court of Appeal rightly declined jurisdiction to review the decision of a trial judge who had dismissed 10 election petitions filed by the petitioners. That is the critical issue in the case, as acknowledged by the CCJ itself. So that really is what it was called upon to decide, Mr. Speaker. And in its judgment, it stated that as follows, Mr. Speaker. For the reasons above stated, the petitioners must be denied permission to appeal the judgment of the Court of Appeal to this court. An appeal to this court has no reasonable prospects of success. The trial judge's judgment was interlocutory, not final, and the Court of Appeal was right to decline jurisdiction to hear an appeal against that judgment. If the court had stopped there, which is the matter it had to do, it would end the story. But it went on and referred to if certain allegations were true. If they were true, it would be troubling. It is that, what is known in law as that obiter comment of the court. So in other words, you have, Mr. Speaker, ratio decidendi, which is the substance, the heart, the decision, and you have obiter, which are comments that are made, which may or may not. They're not, usually they are deemed not to have had the level of thought into them as would go into the actual decision, but they're comments made by the court. But it's those comments that has led to the issues and led to the temerity of members of the opposition coming in this house, stand up in this house and saying the CCJ is backing them. Unfortunately, if the comments hadn't been made, and I would submit unapologetically that in my humble opinion, the comments need not have been made because they were not issues. They are not issues that were canvassed before the court. I can allege anything. I can say anything. Like they said in their petitions, that in Salisbury and in Marigot, the police, in Salisbury in particular, brought in RSS, and they prevented them from doing this. Both of those areas, incidentally, they won in the election. So it obviously shows there is no sense in that. So in terms of the allegations, people can make any allegations. But, Mr. Speaker, the reality is they brought actions in the High Court, they lost. They brought an action, Court of Appeal, they lost. They brought an action in the CCJ, they lost. That is the fact. The unfortunate thing is that there are aspects of that judgment that I suspect what we will see at the next election and beyond will be a consequence flowing from that, but we shall see. But I predict that the same audacious approach, the barefacedness of them to stand up there and say what they say, is that we will see the consequences in time to come in terms of the elections that are coming up.
Honesty. That's what you call it. It's honesty.
Mr. Speaker, medicinal cannabis. Yes. As mentioned briefly in the budget, and from the last budget coming forward, the Honorable Prime Minister, Minister of Finance, has made comments, and indeed, along the way, we have had amendments to the legislation to provide what my friend who deals with our foreign friends, and sometimes has his lapel, I'm not sure if he has it today, Mr. Speaker, but I think it's, what is it called? Is it Cali Reed? Is it Cali Reed? Is that? Cali Reed? Is that Cali Reed? As old time, what's in your time? What's in your? Okay. Oh, Sensimilla, okay. So, Mr. Speaker, we get it all the terms here. But Mr. Speaker, the fact is that the reality is that the approach around the world to cannabis is changing. But one of the things, particularly as it relates to medicinal cannabis, that we have to continue to make clear is that whilst things are changing, they have not changed. And fundamentally, they haven't changed at the international level. So we still have in place a situation where internationally, cannabis is a Class A drug. That is the class of drugs that are deemed to be most dangerous. You may have a different view, I may have a different view, but that's the category that they're in at the moment. And so in developing an industry, we cannot ignore those facts because we don't have a sufficient population and or land mass to be able, I would suggest, to develop a medicinal cannabis industry just for the local market. Really, to be viable and achieve what we would want to achieve in terms of finances and revenues to us, we really need to have markets outside, which means we have to cross our borders into other people's borders, and you have to be aware of the implications of that, which are the immediate implications. If you cross over into the French territory in terms of their sea space or airspace, and you don't necessarily have the collaborative arrangements, there are consequences. If you go into the American space, and indeed, even if you don't go into the American space, even if we trade within ourselves, within the region, because all of us, I believe, yes, I can say, I think all of us engage our banking substantially through the US. We have relationships with them. That the consequence would be that we would end up having ourselves in a problem position. So it's something that has to be approached with full knowledge of all of the ramifications, all of the areas of difficulty, and you have to engage and smooth out all of those areas so that you can get the product out in the market. You also, Mr. Speaker, it would not and cannot be and will not be able to be just, you just go anyway. There are standards. So to get into that market, there will be, what we are producing, if we get to that stage, would have to be of a certain classification, Yes, and they will have, so there will be a requirement for testing. I suppose since we like to talk about bananas, when we used to ship bananas, they were selectors. They were quite arbitrary. They'd pass their knife there, they'd pass the knife and just cut people's bananas. This will not be quite so arbitrary a process. But maybe the other side of that is because it will be very precise and scientific in terms of the requirements. It will not necessarily be easy to achieve and to maintain, and it will require levels of discipline that we would have to bring about in terms of organization. A further analogy, Mr. Speaker, is if you recall with the banana industry, well, I don't know, those who are old enough will remember when you could carry the bananas, you could wrap them in trash. And I was fine. And then I said, no, you can't use trash because it's whatever, you have to use foam. And then they move on, you couldn't use foam. And then you had to box them. And then you had to use, is it diaphin, the blue plastic on the bananas themselves. And you had to have some facility on the farm after a while to wash and so on. And there were consequences of all of those things for certain people in the industry, because it meant that certain people who didn't have, maybe their holding wasn't big enough or whatever, they would not be able. So I say all of that, Mr. Speaker, to say this, that this is the whole medicinal cannabis thrust has, I think, great potential. But there are challenges, and we should not expect that it's something that's going to materialize overnight. It's something we have to approach. Obviously, we can't spend all our lifetimes, but we have to approach it recognizing the challenges, and that we're going to have to tire with to try to meet those challenges, Mr. Speaker. And so in that regard, the government has established two committees, subcommittees, a ministerial and a technical subcommittee. And in terms of the technical subcommittee, various stakeholders have been engaged or invited to come on board, and many of them have. There are a few who have not yet engaged, and one hopes that they will. Those who have so far engaged include medical practitioners, people from the private sector, people from the religious sector, people from the youth, from the public officers and others. It's a wide cross-section of society. We have had a couple of meetings, and we're moving forward, and we are being supported by Impact Justice, which is a regional body based at Cave Hill, Barbados, and you may have heard the name before. Professor Newton is the coordinator of that program. It's been operating in this region for the past 5 or so years, largely funded by the Canadian government, who have put a substantial amount of monies, several millions, well, tens of millions, into that, and Impact Justice have provided support in many areas across the region, and they are providing very, very useful support by way of involvement of Professor Newton and also some other consultants. So we are actually benefiting from the experience of some of the other jurisdictions that have already gone ahead, like St. Vincent and Jamaica, Antigua, St. Kitts, I believe, and a few others, Trinidad. And Mr. Speaker, I have a document here. That document is a document prepared by Impacts and the consultants, which has in it comparisons of the legislation in a number of the jurisdictions that I've spoken about, and a draft piece of legislation for Dominica, which is something I've just received, so it's something we're going to have to go through to fine-tune it to suit our particular circumstance. But, Mr. Speaker, I say that just to say that work is taking place. We have a lot to do, more. Even in terms of meetings, I mean, obviously people are voluntary in terms of that. And, but, Mr. Speaker, the reality is I believe that we are well placed to look into it and seek to allow ourselves to learn from the errors made by some of the jurisdictions that have gone before us, and try to build on that and try to take ourselves forward so that we can have another limb another income stream, another means by which people within the jurisdiction can earn a decent living, but also it's a useful purpose in terms of the medical, or medicinal and other benefits that can be derived from cannabis, Mr. Speaker. So going forward, Mr. Speaker, I think we are taking some action, but going forward, we will have to determine the viability of that industry. We'll have to determine what option we actually take. We will have to, Mr. Speaker, enact the necessary legislation, which, from all I understand and I'm advised, would have to be focused on that industry and sufficiently couched to allow us to avoid the challenges and problems that we could get, that I've referred to earlier. And then, of course, the operationalization of the whole industry. And I think, Mr. Speaker, that it's a challenge, but a challenge that we can rise to. And I look forward in maybe time to come that some greater impact is reflected from this industry in our future national budgets. So, Mr. Speaker, I said all of this, and I say with those few words, I wholeheartedly support the budget.
Yes, Honorable Dr. Daru, I recognize you. Proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I too rise to give my support to the budget 2022-2023 budget before this honorable House. But before I begin, Mr. Speaker, let me join my colleague, Dennis Charles, a neighbor, in offering condolences to my medical, my colleague from the medical fraternity, Dr. Addis King, and now cabinet and parliamentary colleague, on the passing of a beloved father. Mr. Speaker, I would also like to take this opportunity to also reach out to the family and friends of Ms. Kenisha Etienne, and even to the family of the deceased gentleman who was part of this very unfortunate saga. Unfortunately, we have seen no closure to this, but we'd just like to reach out to the family and friends of all involved in this unfortunate incident. I know that my colleague, Minister for Social Services, Dr. King, and of course the Minister for Justice will soon, later this year, bring a suite of legislation to this Parliament that will see strengthening of our child protection laws and also the dispensing of justice, the strengthening of his police force, and I speak of the Minister of Justice, on increasing the capacity of his force to deal with such matters, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as I said before, I would like to spend a few minutes to add my voice and support to this budget. Although, to be honest, there's very little that I can say that haven't been said by my colleagues and speakers before me. I mean, I listened to the eloquence and brilliance of my friend and brother, the Minister of Works, Senator Cassani Laville, and also the passion of the member for the Rosa Central constituency, and of course, always oratory and brilliance of the member for Portsmouth and ministerial neighbor, Honorable Ian Douglas. And it leaves very little for people like myself to say, Mr. Speaker, but I think it would be remiss of me if I do not take the stand to also share a few thoughts on this year's budget. Mr. Speaker, like a few speakers before me, I think it would be unfair if this budget is just looked at in isolation. It has to be looked at, Mr. Speaker, against the backdrop of what is happening in the world today. And I speak to this ongoing war, the Russia-Ukraine war. Mr. Speaker, we are still seeing, I'm reeling from the effects of two major disasters, Mr. Speaker. Tropical Storm Erika in 2015 and Hurricane Maria in 2017. And while oftentimes we hear the opposition members speak to, we were using Maria and Erika, these were not dreams, Mr. Speaker. The COVID-19 pandemic was not a dream. Reality is, Mr. Speaker, that the world faced, where the entire world was shut down, Mr. Speaker, for 2 years or more. And we're still feeling the effects. So we have to look at this budget, Mr. Speaker, in context of what happened. I speak of the 2 natural disasters and also what is happening. And I would like to congratulate the Honorable Minister of Finance and his team, and of course the Honorable Minister for Economic Planning, my friend and brother, Dr. Vince Henderson, for putting together such a wonderful budget, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, just some general comments on the budget. I mean, when we go through the different line items, Mr. Speaker, and we see all of these wonderful initiatives and programs that the government has lined up, we do have to applaud, Mr. Speaker, the efforts of each and every member of the cabinet, Mr. Speaker, the public service, and each and every one, Mr. Speaker, who contributed towards putting this wonderful, as I said, budget together. New infrastructure, Mr. Speaker, to the value of hundreds of millions of dollars in a post-COVID period. An international airport, Mr. Speaker, we are embarking on building an international airport, Mr. Speaker. A new marina, the very big cat that the Minister of Tourism let out of the bag, Mr. Speaker, in Portsmouth. And I visited the Portsmouth, Mr. Speaker, and the cottage area over the weekend. And I mean, I saw the number, Mr. Speaker, of medium-sized and a few 1 or 2 mega yachts in the Portsmouth Bay area, Mr. Speaker. And I think that this marina has been much talked about. I know the honourable member for the Portsmouth constituency have from time to time referred to the Cox and Cox report? Shankland and Cox report, Mr. Speaker, which spoke to the potential that exists in the Portsmouth area. And already, Mr. Speaker, we have seen this government capitalizing or implementing some of these areas, and I speak, of course, to the Moroccan Hotel and the 5-star Kempinski, Mr. Speaker, resort. So the marina will of course, add value here and to see the dream and the potential, the true potential of this jewel of the North, the town of Portsmouth, and realized, Mr. Speaker. Future, ongoing and future housing projects, Mr. Speaker, talking about line items within this year's budget. The over $100 million East Dollars Road, Bagatelle to Lubia Road, Mr. Speaker, which will benefit, of course, my good friend and brother from the Grand Bay constituency, the Honorable Vince Henderson, because most of this road, Mr. Speaker, will be either leading to or passing through some parts of his constituency, Mr. Speaker. New investments in water. And of course, my good friend and brother, he's not here today, the Honorable Senator Nichols Esprit. He spoke so eloquently, Mr. Speaker, and fluently, because he claimed it was his specialty, on the value of water, Mr. Speaker. And while many claim that we have 365 rivers and streams, whatever the case may be, Mr. Speaker, we know how rugged our terrain is, Mr. Speaker, and the development in our terrain is extremely expensive. So while we have 365 rivers or streams, whatever the cost, whatever you want to call them, it costs lots of money, Mr. Speaker, to get them from where they are to the homes, Mr. Speaker. So while we take for granted 98%, I think prior to Tropical Storm Rico, we had 98 or 99% coverage of potable water, Mr. Speaker, to our citizens. It costs the government and, of course, the WASCO millions, sometimes hundreds of millions of dollars, Mr. Speaker, taken from the water source, treatment, pipes, etc. Because right now, what we also saw happening, and I think Senator Esprit spoke of it, is that the post-Erica and Maria exposed the vulnerability of these old water systems, some of them decades old, Mr. Speaker, old copper pipes, etc. And what we see happening, Mr. Speaker, today is that the WASCO and, of course, the government, by extension, is investing hundreds of millions of dollars that the minister responsible for water spoke about yesterday in his presentation, replacing all of these old-time copper pipes, Mr. Speaker, investing in modern treatment, etc., storage, etc., storage capacity. So the cost of getting this water to our faucets, Mr. Speaker, something that we take for granted, enjoying a nice warm bath, is costing the government millions of dollars, which is why I want to appeal to the users, Mr. Speaker, the consumers, to please pay your bill. Please pay your water bill. Look, I mean, the little water bill that you pay every month, Mr. Speaker, is in no way sometimes the minister can speak to that, can sustain the company, and the government has to subsidize a lot of times, Mr. Speaker, invest in this undertaking. So we need you to make your contribution to appreciate the tremendous effort that the government and, of course, the WASCO is making to get this potable water to our homes. Would also like to applaud the government, Mr. Speaker, on its continued investments in health. And while we hear some of the prophets of doom and gloom, Mr. Speaker, speaks to that you would swear that this is the worst place to be, Mr. Speaker. Slowly but surely, and I'm sure my friend and colleague, the Honorable Minister for Health, will speak to it in detail. Slowly but surely, Mr. Speaker, we have seen the health sector, Mr. developing and being modernized before our very eyes, Mr. Speaker, and there's no denying this, Mr. Speaker. No denying it. Mr. Speaker, if you go around the island, you'll see the 12 and more being built, modern health centers that are being built in the various communities around the island. The Dominica-China Friendship Hospital, and later on in my presentation, Mr. Speaker, I will try to get to take the members of the opposition on the tour around the island, Mr. Speaker, because obviously they don't seem to be going anywhere, Mr. Speaker, maybe from their home, apparently to Parliament for a few minutes, and maybe the occasional trip to Q95 to spew their usual diatribe, Mr. Speaker. Because when you go around the island, Mr. Speaker, and you see all of these things happening, Mr. Speaker, you wonder, why would they come here to pretend and try to mislead the public that nothing is happening? So I will take them on the tour, Mr. Speaker, towards the end of my contribution, starting in the south, all the way to the north, Mr. Speaker. So hopefully by the end of that time they will. So I speak to the. I was speaking, Mr. Speaker, to the developments in health. The new Dominica-China Friendship Hospital, Mr. Speaker, magnificent edifice, and not just the infrastructure, modern equipment, Mr. Speaker. For the first time in the history of Dominica, an MRI machine available for services here in Dominica. The much talked about and often ridiculed HIFU, Mr. Speaker, HIFU machine, Mr. Speaker, that obviously they did not understand what the HIFU meant. Yeah, they were laughing at it, Mr. Speaker. From what I recall, it means a high intensity frequency ultrasound, which is a machine, Mr. Speaker, that can be used to diagnose and also treat what they call not so deep tumors, Mr. Speaker, and non-cancerous tumors, Mr. Speaker. The only one, Mr. Speaker, in that part of the world. You with me, Mr. Speaker? So here we are, Mr. Speaker. We are the prophets of doom and gloom preaching, Mr. Speaker, and we have all of this major development, Mr. Speaker, happening in health, Mr. Speaker. An upgraded CT scan at the new Dominica-China Friendship Hospital. Dialysis unit, Mr. Speaker, an entire section devoted, Mr. Speaker, to treating patients with kidney or renal disorders, Mr. Speaker. New theaters, Mr. Speaker, the Dominica-China Friendship Hospital. New theaters. The Brenda Strafford Eye Care Center. And yes, Mr. Speaker, why it was named after Brenda Strafford? Because of this foundation, immense contribution to optical care services here on Island. And they can go back, I think, to the 80s, Mr. Speaker, where they constructed a few health centers. I think Bagatelle, the old health center in Bagatelle, the old one that is. We have a new modern one right now. And some other health centers, Mr. Speaker. And in recognition of the efforts, Mr. Speaker, the contribution towards eye care, optical services here on Island, that this eye care center was renamed after her. And I could give a little history, and I'm sure the Minister for Health would probably allude to that while it is named the Brenda Strafford Eye Care Center, it is part of the Dominica-China Friendship Hospital. With me. And then we recall that I would like to inform the House that the Brenda Strafford, I think they had some funds, somewhere in the region of $1 million EC towards developing the eye care center at the old hospital. Of course, Mr. Speaker, $1 million sounds like a lot of money. I mean, myself and my friend, I'm sure Minister Blackwell can spend that probably in 1 hour on Amazon, Mr. Speaker. $1 million EC dollars. So while Mr. Speaker, so while $1 million maybe might sound like a lot of, you'll have to answer that, my brother. While $1 million, Mr. Speaker, might sound like a lot of money, Mr. Speaker, $1 million really, Mr. Speaker, maybe it would just be enough to put a few blocks, Mr. Speaker, and probably paint up the building. So recognizing, Mr. Speaker, that the new ongoing project of Dominica-China Friendship Hospital, we had discussions during my tenure as the Minister of Health. We had discussions with the Brenda Strafford Foundation where they agreed that these monies would now be rechannel, Mr. Speaker, channel into procuring some pieces of equipment, because this equipment that you take for granted, they're expensive. Maybe one piece of equipment would cost in the region maybe of $300,000 US, Mr. Speaker. So this is what happened. So Mr. Speaker, so these funds that were then placed, Mr. Speaker, toward the building of the foundation was then used to procure equipment, some equipment, Mr. Speaker, for this foundation. And of course, part of the arrangement is that the clinic being named after the Brenda Strafford Foundation. We see in this year's budget, Mr. Speaker, initiatives of procurement of agricultural produce. And again, the Minister of Agriculture and the Minister for Trade and my sister Dennis Charles spoke to that no longer will farmers have to wait months, Mr. Speaker, or in some cases never, for payment, Mr. Speaker, of their produce, Mr. Speaker. The National Abattoir, a further $2 million, Minister of Agriculture, is going to be invested in the National Abattoir. And again, my brother and friend, Senator Esprit, I'm not sure if he picked up my notes yesterday before he made his presentation. Because we heard the member for Roseau North, my partner, not just your partner, AG, my good partner to Danny Ligger. We're good now, you know? Yeah. You know, almost ridiculously, you know, the fact that the auditor's report showed that we had spent more than we had earned at the abattoir, Mr. Speaker. Like this was some sort of victory for him or for them, Mr. Speaker. What is that about, Mr. Speaker? My brother, the abattoir was never built, Mr. Speaker, as a source of revenue. And Senator Esprit said it quite rightly, Mr. Speaker. The idea behind the abattoir was that there would be a venue, Mr. Speaker, where pork and poultry in particular producers would be able to bring their animals in a clean, sanitary, Mr. Speaker, environmental health officer, former, I don't know if he still is that, in a clean and sanitary environment, Mr. Speaker, to be slaughtered and, of course, processed, and, of course, to get the public, Mr. Speaker, into the habit of trying to eat what we produce locally, Mr. Speaker. It was never, ever built, Mr. Speaker, never, ever built for profit, which is why the Honorable Prime Minister, a number of times that we said if there's somebody who feels that they want to invest, and we're hoping, of course, that somebody in the private sector, you know, maybe somebody like yourself, Mr. Speaker, who know would take over the abattoir and get it to the next level, package and labeling, etc. But we're quite content, Mr. Speaker, to continue running the abattoir because we have the farmers bringing in their live pork, Mr. Speaker, their live pigs and their poultry, and the public now has fresh, locally produced white meat, Mr. Speaker, available to them, Mr. Speaker. 7 new schools, Mr. Speaker. 7 new schools to be built in this financial year, or at least begun, Mr. Speaker. 5 primary schools, huh? 5 primary schools. I
see you on cutting edge technology.
Oh, that. No, yeah, Mr. Speaker, I saw people using what they call it, a small podium. But honestly, when I came to Parliament, I really thought this podium was hallowed, you know, and only reserved for the Prime Minister. But I said skip from here to there and otherwise. So I decided. But I'm good.
No, I'm impressed. Continue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yeah. 7 new schools, Mr. Speaker, to be built in this new financial year. 5 primary schools and 2 secondary schools, Mr. Speaker. Of the 5 primary schools and 1 of the secondary schools, we'd like to thank our friends, very good friends, Mr. Speaker, of the People's Republic of China, Mr. Speaker, for funding this school, Mr. Speaker. And of course, I will speak to our foreign relations a bit later in my presentation. 5 primary schools and 2 secondary schools, Mr. Speaker. The member for Roseau North, the Goodwill Secondary School, Mr. Speaker, is carded or to be built in this new financial year, the much talked about. And 5 primary schools, and I know some of my colleagues, Mr. Speaker, they're very happy. And I speak to my Kalinago brother. One of the schools are going to be built in Seneku, Pebush, the member of parliament for Pebush in Kalibishi, and my friend and brother also from the Grand Bay constituency in Tetmon, and also the member of parliament for Viekas in school in Tibo, Mr. Speaker, much needed, and of course yours truly in Bellevue Chopin, recognizing the tremendous influx of new residents in the Bellevue Chopin catchment area, and of course this little 2 or 3 room facility right now really isn't cutting it for the now expanded community of Bellevue-Chopin. And truth be told, Mr. Speaker, I really would like to take this opportunity myself as a member of Parliament for Bellevue-Chopin on behalf of my other colleagues to really thank Mr. Speaker, the constituents for their tremendous patience, Mr. Speaker, because truth be told, the current arrangement, Mr. Speaker, is really not optimal, Mr. Speaker, conducive for proper learning. And I mean, the member for Calibishi, well, the member for Pebush will tell you that the arrangements in Calibishi and even Pilit-Savant, Mr. Speaker, we have some of our students at their former teachers' college, a few of them in the original Bellevue-Chopin. So we really need to consolidate it, Mr. Speaker. So it's something good news to all of us that work will finally start in this financial year, Mr. Speaker. And of course, the late start, I remember when the Prime Minister during his presentation mentioned it, I heard, I don't know if it's the one from, sorry, the member from...
Senator or the member. Either a senator or the member.
Yeah. I was correcting myself, Mr. Speaker. I refer to him as the other one, but that's trying to be a little funny. I'm the elected member for Salisbury, Mr. Speaker, elected, one of the few elected members on the other side, Mr. Speaker. He mentioned accord, meaning again. Mr. Speaker, we have to recognize that these are projects, truthfully, which have been on the cards for the past maybe 3 or 4 years. But again, for no fault of ours, Mr. Speaker, because as I mentioned, these 5 primary schools and 1 secondary school are going to be built by the Chinese. And due to COVID-19, Mr. Speaker, and of course, we had us back in China, Mr. Speaker. Back in China, we had some serious outbreaks of COVID and serious restrictions on traveling, etc., Mr. Speaker. So this is what would have held back the project. But I'm pleased to report to the House that all of the final designs have been signed on, Mr. Speaker, and we are just awaiting our friends from China to now, of course, select the contractor so we can begin work on this school, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we see a budget which sees the state maintains all of its social programs. And I'm pretty sure, Mr. Speaker, that our citizens would understand, especially coming from the 2 disasters I mentioned, the COVID-19 pandemic, and even the now ongoing war with Russia and Ukraine war. Our citizens will understand where if we had to cut back on some of these programs. Mr. Speaker, but we have yet, Mr. Speaker, to cut back on anyone. In fact, we see some of the numbers increasing, Mr. Speaker, in terms of our over 70 and over, the monthly stipend to a 70 and over. Our folks under the NEP, I heard Teacher Bonnie mention the figure yesterday, Mr. Speaker. My eyes popped out, Mr. Speaker, of my head. 170,000 monthly to just the Categories constituency to pay the NEP workers and the over 60 and over, Mr. Speaker, beneficiaries, Mr. Speaker, the Categories constituency. So we've seen the state maintain all of these social services and in some cases intensify, Mr. Speaker, its efforts, and we really want to applaud them. And I mentioned the NEP. I have always been a very big advocate of the NEP, Honorable Member for the Salivia and Minister. And I would like to invite members of this Honorable House, Mr. Speaker, to drive through the Pilit-Savant and Grand Bay constituency, Mr. Speaker, because I maintain, Mr. Speaker, if there ever is was a case for an increase, Mr. Speaker, in the salaries, Mr. Speaker, or wages, Mr. Speaker, of the NEP workers, the Grand Bay and the Pilit-Savant, Mr. Speaker, would probably be the most deserving of it. Because, I mean, these people do a tremendous job, Mr. Speaker, keeping our roads and our byways, village roads. And in fact, and some of the main streets, Mr. Speaker, the main arteries to the communities, they sometimes work on them, Mr. Speaker, to keep them clean. So I really would like to really congratulate and thank my NEP workers within the constituency, Mr. Speaker, for the tremendous effort. The housing revolution continues, Mr. Speaker, in this year's budget. And we talk about at a time when I think Hurricane Maria, we saw over 90% of our housing stock affected. And Mr. Speaker, people can say what they want, and I mean, I tell my constituents that from time to time, especially when they complain. Of course, we still have a few, Mr. Speaker, houses to be done. I'm hoping, of course, Minister for Housing, that the World Bank housing project can speed up a bit, Mr. Speaker, can speed up a bit. I think they're a bit slow getting off the ground. But Mr. Speaker, most, and I can say for the Pilit-Savant constituency, Mr. Speaker, without any fear, Mr. Speaker, without any fear of, what do they call it? Contradiction, Mr. Speaker. that 95% of the homes, Mr. Speaker, that were repaired in the 57 constituency were done by this government, Mr. Speaker. Because very few people, Mr. Speaker, in this part of the country, Mr. Speaker, had insurance. And even the few who had insurance policy, Mr. Speaker, we all know of the difficulties experienced by the insurance companies. So when people talk about the 1 or 2 people who still need housing assistance, of course they will still need housing assistance, Mr. Speaker. The World Bank, Mr. Speaker, and the IMF, I think, or the World Bank, gave us 20 or 25 years, Mr. Speaker, to get back to where we were. Just after Hurricane Maria, when they came to do the assessment, they said that Dominica is going to be needing 25 or 30 or 40 more years, Mr. Speaker, to get back to where we were the morning before Hurricane Maria. So obviously, Mr. Speaker, there will be pockets of people and areas, Mr. Speaker, still needing assistance. There are pockets of people needing, with all the housing investment we've made in the 57 constituency, there are still little areas that need help, Mr. Speaker. But there is no denying, Mr. Speaker, the investment and the work that we've done in getting people back to safe and resilient housing, Mr. Speaker, post-Erica and post-Maria, Mr. Speaker. So when the opposition feel like they want to go all in the middle of the bush and look at sometimes some semi-vagrant people who have been living in their little shack for their whole life and come and post this on social media to try to give an indication that the government is not doing anything, Mr. Speaker, as it pertains to housing, tell them will and come again, Mr. Speaker. Talk to the people whose homes were repaired. And we heard the Prime Minister, and highlighted, of course, by my good friend, the member for Soufriere. The new phase, Mr. Speaker. The housing revolution is now being taken to another level, Mr. Speaker. Because we've heard not the cries, the comments from some of our young professionals or working class people that, yeah, applaud to you guys. Kudos for what you've done for the less fortunate folks in getting them houses. What about us? Because not many of us, or some of us, a lot of us would not have had the luxury of being bequeathed, is the word they use in law, AJ? Some property, okay, from our parents, neither land, neither houses, Mr. Speaker. So we really would like to start our family. Here we are, married most times, okay, young couple, both professionals, and want to start a family, Mr. Speaker.
Most times.
Want to start a family. Mr. Speaker, can I please get protection from my own side, please?
Yes.
Thank you.
Members. The Honorable Minister is asking for protection.
Yeah, thank you very much, sir. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Okay.
So, Mr. Speaker, so this sector, this group of citizens, Mr. Speaker, you know, they've been talking to us and they have been applauding us for what we've done for the less fortunate, Mr. Speaker, in terms of getting them back into safe, resilient homes. But they're now asking, you know, we also need some attention because we also make a contribution towards the country development. We pay our taxes, we pay our VAT, etc. So what's in it for us? And we have heeded, Mr. Speaker, to their call in a big way, Mr. Speaker. I think the project is going to start, I think, in Portsmouth and Warner. And as we heard being articulated by the Honorable Prime Minister, that they will now move to other parts of the country, Mr. Speaker. I'm very elated, Mr. Speaker, and I know as equally elated as my brother from the Salibia constituency, my Kalinago brother, Mr. Speaker, on this new Kalinago fund, Mr. Speaker, in the Kalinago territory. And this is, Speaker, as you can tell from everything, my features, I'm maybe 95% Kalinago. Yeah, and yeah, 95% Kalinago. And my brother Blackwell likes to say that he has some Kalinago thing, but but Mr. Speaker, I'm elated, Mr. Speaker. I'm very happy for the people of the Kalinago territory. It's a fund and initiative that has been spoken about for a number of years by administrations before. But it had to take this Labour Party administration, Mr. Speaker, to make it a reality, Mr. Speaker. And I'm really happy for them. And I have no doubt that under the stewardship of my brother, the member for the Salibia constituency, that this fund will be administrated or managed wisely, Mr. Speaker, properly. And we can look forward, of course, to this fund increasing in, of course, quantum in the coming years, Mr. Speaker. So I spoke to a number of not all, Mr. Speaker, there's a few of the selected PSIP projects, Mr. Speaker, within the budget. But not just that, Mr. Speaker. Within this budget, we've also managed to include some relief measures, Mr. Speaker. Imagine that. Relief measures, Mr. Speaker, here are referred to as quote-unquote goodies. At a time like this, Mr. Speaker, when people expected us to probably increase some taxes, Mr. Speaker, to put measures on revenue earning measures in place for the government. We are talking about relief measures, Mr. Speaker. And I know the opposition on the other side, they like to talk about, oh, there's nothing has happened for the folks. But I think it was the member for West, the Minister for the Blue and Green Economy, who quite eloquently expressed, Mr. Speaker, all the things that we're doing that equate to putting money back in people's pocket, Mr. Speaker. So putting money back in people's pocket, as you like to say, doesn't mean that you have to pass an envelope and give somebody some hard cash, Mr. Speaker. All of the folks who are receiving housing, Mr. Speaker, the housing, the free housing, these are folks would more than likely would be paying rent, Mr. Speaker, maybe $1,500 monthly rent. So now this money now comes back to their pocket, Mr. So all of these measures, and we speak to the reduction of VAT on electricity, Mr. Speaker. Namely, absolutely no VAT on fuel surcharge starting August 1st, which is in a couple of days' time. The removal of charges and taxes on pleasure crafts. Mr. Blackman, I'm not going to refer to you on this one. Removal of VAT on agricultural tools. Grants to first-time home buyers. And the permanent reduction of land transfer fees, amongst others, Mr. Speaker. So in summary, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister, and if I may be allowed to quote him, at the risk of not being accused of plagiarism, in his address, and he stated, and I quote, government's core policy is to improve the circumstances of our people in good times and bad times, Mr. Speaker, close quote. So the aforementioned circumstances I mentioned, Mr. Speaker, the disasters and the ongoing war, etc., and I predict none in the foreseeable future, Mr. Speaker, will affect our ability to care for our citizens. You know why? Because what we do, Mr. Speaker, and I think the Honorable Prime Minister, again, he likes to quote this portion from the good book that says, whatever you do to the least of our brothers, Mr. Speaker. That's from the good book itself. So on that premise, Mr. Speaker, that I know that the good Lord above will continue to bless us, Mr. Speaker, in spite of all the adverse circumstances, past and current and future, will continue to bless us so we can continue to take care of our citizens, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, of course, from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs point of view, Dominica, we know, values the right to conduct business. From time to time, Mr. Speaker, sorry for asking permission to refer to my little tablet from time to time. Values the right, Mr. Speaker, to conduct business and pursue opportunities in the interest of its people as a sovereign state. And, of course, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, International Business and Diaspora Relations has as its primary mandate the task of advancing Dominica's foreign policy. This means that the ministry must ensure that it maintains a proactive existence and seek out other like-minded partners to champion our domestic interests and domestic goals, Mr. Speaker. So we have continued to advance Dominica's interests overseas, Mr. Speaker, in spite of the COVID-19 pandemic, which limited travel interaction. But as you know, that we continue to use technology to advantage, Zoom and the other Microsoft meetings, etc. And despite the lingering effects of this pandemic, it was important to maintain a strong economic presence, Mr. Speaker, especially as a small island developing state. So all of these setbacks, I talk about the COVID, etc., the different disasters, have affected the way in which we have had to advance our foreign policy. But we continued, Mr. Speaker, to forge ahead. Mr. Speaker, as a ministry and as a country, we recognize that all of these threats of nature, the pandemic, and we now hear about this emerging monkeypox, Mr. Speaker, we're not unique to Dominica. The reality is, Mr. Speaker, that small states like ours have little choice but to plan within the context of disruption and uncertainty. So we have to make provision, Mr. Speaker, for these unforeseen events. So in that context, we at the ministry have had to redefine and redesign our foreign policy to maintain a seat at the table, Mr. Speaker, and that we did. And I could highlight a number of the important meetings and conferences, Mr. Speaker, that we attended, because while we are a very small country, small island developing state, Mr. Speaker, we know that it's important to have a seat at the table. So the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Speaker, many of us see us as probably attending meetings, Mr. Speaker, and attending to Dominica's responsibilities under international protocols, agreements, etc., or, of course, offering protocol services. But, Mr. Speaker, we are much, much more than that, Mr. Speaker, and we are often referred to as sometimes the invisible and silent partner in the country's development. Because a number of these projects and initiatives, Mr. Speaker, you see appearing now in black and white, in this estimate, Mr. Speaker, a lot of times they start, Mr. Speaker, at the level of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, whether on the initiative of the Prime Minister or myself as Foreign Affairs Minister when we travel or we attend conferences, discussions that have, Mr. Speaker, a lot of times this is where this project started. So by the time, Mr. Speaker, that the ministers, respective ministers get to talk about it, this project would already have been cemented, signed for, etc. but a lot of the background work, Mr. Speaker, would have been done by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Speaker. So oftentimes, yes, so Mr. Minister Laville can come and talk about how much, $700,000? So by the time it gets into the black and white, Mr. Speaker, it gets into the black and white, the respective minister, of course, speaks about it, and rightfully so. But like I said, a lot of the background initial work would be done at the level of the Foreign Affairs. I really want to thank the Permanent Secretary and the staff of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for all the work that they do, Mr. Speaker. And I can speak also to this ongoing agricultural science complex project at the complex being done, Mr. Speaker, at 1 mile Portsmouth. So a number of these projects, and I think the Minister of Education will tell you that a lot of the initial work, a lot of the nitty-gritty, Mr. Speaker, troublesome work to get us to the point where we can start this primary school and secondary school with funding from our People's Republic of China. Mr. Speaker, there was a lot of back and forth, a lot of nitty-gritty work, Mr. Speaker, a lot of it being coordinated and forwarded, of course, by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So, Mr. Speaker, as the Minister for Foreign Affairs, I would like also to also recognize the efforts of our late comrade, Mr. Speaker, the former Member of Parliament and Minister of State within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs with responsibility for diaspora relations, our fallen comrade Edward Regis, former Member of Parliament for the Granby constituency, who prior to his untimely, well, we say untimely, but as I said, God, our date is appointed even before we died, demise. Yeah. His premature demise, Mr. Speaker, started some tremendous work, Mr. Speaker, with our diaspora citizens, because we recognize the importance, Mr. Speaker, the importance that our diaspora, Mr. Speaker, citizens play in the development of Dominica. The barrier economy, remittances, etc., Mr. Speaker, to mention a number, Mr. Speaker, of our initiatives. So, given the ongoing, well, I say ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, and when travel and etc. was very difficult, Mr. Speaker, we've now seen the travel and moving around starting to relax. So we've reinitiated discussions with a number of our key members of the diaspora and relations in organizations, in the U.S. I know Houston is a very big one, and the other metropolitan cities, London, etc. And sometime 2 weeks ago, we had a Zoom meeting, and we also carried further the meeting next week to try to consolidate, to get back to where we were pre-COVID, Mr. Speaker. That even touch on corporate agreements, Mr. Speaker, with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs from time to time engaging. And recently, for example, Minister for Green Economy, during our visit to Morocco, we engage on, and also education, we engage on new cooperation agreements between the Kingdom of Morocco and the Commonwealth of Dominica as it pertains to cooperation in agriculture, education, etc., Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, as you can see, the list of our supporting roles as a ministry is endless, and it relates to building, and we play a very vital role as the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in building dynamic Dominica. So it's not to put on our suits and go to the UN or the OS, etc., Mr. Speaker. We also interact with a number of our partners to ensure that we play our part in building the dynamic Dominica, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, permit me a few minutes to just thank, of course, as I mentioned already, the entire staff of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Permanent Secretary, very hard-working Permanent Secretary and staff, and the head and staff of our overseas missions in London, Washington, New York, Mr. Speaker, and the UAE, United Arab Emirates, Mr. Speaker. And on this road, Mr. Speaker, I would like to, we have the Republic of Cuba, there's China, Mr. Speaker, all the others. Thank you, Honorable Henderson. To thank the members, the head of mission, Mr. Speaker, and the staff. And on this, Mr. Speaker, I would like to say a special thanks and appreciation to our Acting High Commissioner in our London mission, Mr. Speaker, for her tremendous role, Mr. Speaker, in getting our very own Baroness Patricia Scotland re-elected, Mr. Speaker, as the Secretary General of the Commonwealth at the recent Sugar Commonwealth Federal Government meeting in Kigali, Rwanda. And while, Mr. Speaker, much was not said about it nationally, had the opposite happened, that we had lost this our bid, Mr. Speaker, you would not be hearing the end of it. And I can tell this Honorable Mr. Speaker that it was a very tough election, getting re-elected, We were up against probably the 5 biggest members of the Commonwealth, the 5 biggest economies, the UK's and the others. And we were up against a very tough campaign, because there was this campaign to oust Mr. Speaker, to prevent her from doing her accepted second, what has been almost like a given, Mr. Speaker, a given, how would I put it, a culture, a given practice at the Commonwealth, that she do a second term. And Mr. Speaker, this victory, as low-key as it was, is very significant, Mr. Speaker, because what it did, it cemented Dominica and our head of government, our Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, our important Mr. Speaker, in the international community. So I'm not sure, Mr. Speaker, if many have grasped what I said, that we were up against 5 of the biggest countries, Mr. Speaker. They had this orchestrated campaign to oust her. 5 of the biggest economies, Mr. Speaker. And our small little population island, Little Rock of 70,000 people, the Honorable Prime Minister, Speaker, at the head, Mr. Speaker, we managed to pull through to get our baroness, Mr. Speaker. So as I said, so while many tried to downplay as I said, our worth of value in the international community, Mr. Speaker, this is yet another manifestation, Mr. Speaker. And this is just one of many. We saw, Mr. Speaker, at the beginning of the pandemic, Dominica, again Dominica, not one of these, what is called the MDCs, the Barbados and the Jamaicas and the Trinidad. Dominica was the first to receive vaccines, Mr. Speaker, in the region. The first, again, Mr. Speaker, because of our relation, Mr. Speaker, with the international community. We were also one of the first to receive ventilators. At the time when ventilators probably cost more than diamonds, Mr. Speaker. Again, Mr. Speaker, from our friend, the People's Republic of China. So as I said, Mr. Speaker, these sort of manifestations that, as much as they would like to downplay our importance or how we see in the outside world see our country and our leader, Mr. Speaker, as a very, 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 very strong person, Mr. Speaker. And no amount of diatribe or rhetoric, Mr. Speaker, is going to stop that, because I just pointed out, Mr. Speaker, a number of instances. So, Mr. Speaker, on that note, I would just like to thank our many bilateral partners, the Republic of China. All of the major projects that they have.
20 more minutes.
That'll be fine, Mr. Speaker. All of the major projects that they have funded over the years, the stadium, Mr. Speaker, infrastructure, the college, the State House, the Dominica China Friendship Hospital, and we spoke about the number of others on this year's budget. And not just that, also in terms of helping us with our human resource capacity, Mr. Speaker, number of specialists at the Dominica China Friendship Hospital, etc. The Republic of Cuba. In terms of, there's no denying the contribution that the Republic of Cuba has made, Mr. Speaker, to our health and education sector. Myself, I'm a proud, extremely proud product, Mr. Speaker, and also I'm sure my colleague, Dr. King, proud products, Mr. Speaker, of the Cuban Revolution, Mr. Speaker. And I say it, Mr. Speaker, there's no way. I was always a very bright guy, Mr. Speaker, you know that, we went to school together. I know my partner also said that I was very bright, but he took it back right away. My partner, Master, you know, yeah, he took it back.
The Senator.
Senator Master. Mr. Speaker, but seriously, the Republic of Cuba, Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure, Mr. Speaker, yes, while there can be a monetary value attached to Mr. Speaker, I don't think we can put a value on the contribution that the Republic of Cuba has made, Mr. Speaker, to countries like ourselves. And I was speaking of education and health, Mr. Speaker. I was speaking of myself, Mr. Speaker, proud product. And while I was extremely bright, you know, that as I said, there's no way, Mr. Speaker, no way that my poor country parents would have afforded allow me, Mr. Speaker, to imagine of being a medical doctor, because we know what the cost of getting a medical degree would be, Mr. Speaker. So thanks to Cuba, Mr. Speaker, people like myself and a number of people with potentials, but without the financial means, Mr. Speaker, could be somebody. And just look where I am today, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, in the area of health, as I said, the Republic of Cuba have also made tremendous contribution, Mr. Speaker, in terms of personnel. We so quickly responded to our call, Mr. Speaker, in sending some 30, almost 40 man-strong members of the Henry Reeves Medical Brigade to allow us in the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic, Mr. Speaker, to beef up our local efforts there, Mr. Speaker. And we continue to speak, Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Republic of Cuba, and we will speak at whatever forum, whatever opportunity we get, Mr. Speaker, and I want to also speak in this parliament that we continue to speak out against the injustices we think that have been meted out or leveled out against the Cuban government and people. The lifting of the 60-something-year-old embargo on the Cuban people, Mr. Speaker, very unjust. The also removal of Cuba as a state-sponsored, from the state-sponsored terrorism list, Mr. Speaker, among many other injustices, Mr. Speaker. The Cuban people need to now breathe, Mr. Speaker. They need to breathe and then let Cuba flourish, Mr. Speaker, like the jewel of the Caribbean, okay, that it is, Mr. Speaker. The Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, Mr. Speaker, in spite of their difficulties and internal difficulties in recent years, Mr. Speaker, they've continued to maintain a presence here. They've continued to maintain a presence, their embassy here in Dominica. I mean, knowing what they went through in recent time, Mr. Speaker, they could easily have said that, hey, you know, we're going to shut down and etc. And we really want to applaud them, Mr. Speaker, for continuing to maintain their friendship with us, and as little as they could in recent years, that they continue to reach out to us. And we cannot forget, Mr. Speaker, the efforts at the time when things were much better with them in Venezuela, and I think we have evidence of this all over the island. The Petrocasas, although the Hurricane Maria did a number on some of them, the Petrocasa initiated, Mr. Speaker, a number of the filling stations in Scott Z and Fonseca, and a number of other villages, Mr. Speaker, the filling stations under the Petro Carib initiative. So we want to thank them for continuing to be friendly with us, Mr. Speaker. And as I was informed by the ambassador that things are starting to look up a little better in Venezuela, Mr. Speaker, and we're hoping, of course, that they can get back on their feet in the quickest possible time, so we can see a better quality of life or conditions for the people of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. We have had other solid partners, Mr. Speaker, the Kingdom of Morocco, the United States, United Kingdom, amongst many others, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I might better spend a few minutes just to run through my constituency. I know a number of them have listening, and we have seen the successful resettlement of the Pilit Savannah constituency, Mr. Speaker, in the Belleville-Chopin area. And in spite of many what they call issues, Mr. Speaker, in terms of when they just came to Belleville-Chopin, of course, or an entire village coming into an already existing village, we have seen a number of these initial issues being resolved, Mr. Speaker, and we now see a much larger, Mr. Speaker, united community. Talk about the incoming Pilit people and, of course, the original Belleville-Chopin residents. Complete with all amenities, Mr. Speaker, and I heard the member for Rosa Central speak passionately about her plans for the Riverside Apartments. We have an existing commercial center, Mr. Speaker, already. I suspect, I think she visited, Mr. Speaker, I suspect she visited the commercial center in Belleville-Chopin, where we have all of the activities she spoke about the plan, and even more, Mr. Speaker. We talk about seamstress, we've got a tailor, Mr. Speaker, seamstress, a supermarket, a spa, Mr. Speaker, so a beauty spa, entertainment center. We've got a lot, what do you call it, Blast, Mr. Speaker, a few mini restaurants. We have a branch of the Rosa Credit Union here right there, Mr. Speaker, on site. We also have a gym, clothing stores, Mr. Speaker, among a few, the laundromat, etc. So the commercial center in Belleville-Chopin is being utilized, Mr. Speaker, although we still have some work to do in terms of the management structure. I was admonished by the Honorable Prime Minister recently, but we see it serving the purpose that it was envisioned for, Mr. Speaker, to create an avenue for the displaced and, of course, a few of the existing residents in Belleville-Chopin, small businesses. We've seen the reconstruction, Mr. Speaker, of a number of bridges and roads within the Pilit Savannah constituency that was damaged by Hurricane Maria in Fonseca, Bagatelle, etc. Much publicized, every time it rained, we saw the deep and wide gorges that the waterways did, Mr. Speaker, during the passage of Hurricane Maria, and we know how to deal with some of this. We saw the completion of the rehabilitation of the Bagatelle Water Project on the BNTF-8, Mr. Speaker. As I mentioned earlier, decade-old water system that was damaged during Erika and Maria. and the replacement of all of these old copper pipes, Mr. Speaker, that were eroded, etc. Construction of a new storage tank, among others. Health centers, health facilities, Mr. Speaker. Of the 12 health facilities that have been built, the PD7 constituency was lucky. I say, okay, to have received two of them, Mr. Speaker. Two of them, one at the Bagatelle, Mr. Speaker, and one at Bellevue Chopin. And I want to thank the Minister of Finance and, of course, the former Minister of Health, Mr. Speaker, for making it happen. We are the residents of the Bagatelle community, very loving people, strong, loving supporters. They can now access, Mr. Speaker, health services in a modern environment, modern facility, and of course the new Bellevue Chopin to cater to this larger modern tongue of Bellevue Chopin. Sports has always been, Mr. Speaker, a passion and priority of mine as Member of Parliament, and we've seen during my tenure as PAL Rep, we've seen the development and modernization of a number of the facilities in Bagatelle and Pichler, Mr. Speaker, and now Bellevue Chopin. Not just, Mr. Speaker, the infrastructure, but yours truly have been the architect of a number of community and constituency leagues, Mr. Speaker. In fact, as we speak, we have the ongoing Dr. Kenneth Darrow and Baffin Point Sports Club Football League, and I invite you on weekends, Saturday or Sunday, any one of you, to take a drive to the lovely community of Bagatelle to see our young folks, Mr. Speaker, engaged in Hamlet against Hamlet, Mr. Speaker, leagues. And Mr. Speaker, this league it's not just, I know he's trying something. And Mr. Speaker, it's not just the naming of the league after Dr. Kenneth Darrow, the Member of Parliament, Mr. Speaker. Yours truly would have ensured that each and every one of the teams, Mr. Speaker, received the full gears from top to bottom, shoes and hoods and socks, everything, Mr. Speaker, fully sponsored by yourself. So it is a case of me just making a contribution of $1,000, Mr. Speaker. So when you hear the Dr. Kenneth Darrow Football League, it is the Dr. Kenneth Darrow Football League, Mr. Speaker. Yep. Mr. Speaker, can I have some protection from my own side, please, again? Yeah. Mr. Speaker, I would also like to thank the Member of Parliament for the Rosa Central constituency for a kind donation and sharing of two of the table tennis sets, Mr. Speaker, that was for efforts donated by the People's Republic of China. She was very kind and gracious, Mr. Speaker, to recognizing my interest and passion in sports, and also my investment that I made in sports. She was kind enough to donate two to the PD7 constituency. So one was placed at Bellevue Chopin, being used, and also the other in Pichler. Very well organized, small, well organized community as it pertains to sports, Mr. Speaker, and they're being used, Mr. Speaker. In Stowe, we saw an almost $700,000 what they call breakwater at the Stowe landing site, Mr. Speaker. And while myself and my colleague, Minister Henderson, that
10 more minutes.
Mr. Speaker, maybe that's fine. That's fine, yeah. I think I might not need it.
Move that the Honorable Minister for Foreign Affairs be granted an additional 5 minutes to complete his contribution to the budget debate.
Mr. Speaker, I second the motion.
It has been moved and seconded that the Honorable Dr. Kenneth Darrow be given an additional 5 minutes. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. Honorable Minister, you are given an additional 5 minutes.
Thank you, brothers. Mr. Speaker, we spent almost $700,000 on the break and water at Stowe, but we are planning, Mr. Speaker, on going beyond this. Myself and my colleague, Minister, the member for Granby, who a number of his constituents also do fish in that area, land the fish rather in this area. We have again, we have re-engaged our Japanese friends, Mr. Speaker, in the development of not just a fisheries complex, but a multi-purpose marine compound here, where we can not just see the landing of fish and ice, and ice production, but also tourism and recreational activity, Mr. Speaker. So we had the opportunity to visit the Japanese ambassador to Dominica, located in Port of Spain recently, and looks positive, Mr. Speaker, and we're hoping that this is something that we can see to fruition, Mr. Speaker, at some point in the near future. We mentioned housing, Mr. Speaker, and I'm pleased to announce, and I think that it would do the members of parliament go to visit the housing project going on right now at Center Grande, Mr. Speaker, to house the dislocated residents of Dubic, former Dubic, and also some more homes being built also to house some of the constituents of the Honorable Vince Henderson from Granby, Mr. Speaker. And again, like I've done many times before, since Tropical America and the original Petro Castles project was done, to thank the then MP, my good friend and colleague, Honorable Justina Charles, and now, of course, the late Edward Regis, and now my good friend and brother, Honorable Vince Henderson, for allowing my peeps, Mr. Speaker, rather my constituents, to settle within their geophysical space in Granby, Mr. Speaker. I would like to thank them for that. Mr. Speaker, as I've done, I have thanked the staff of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. But it would be remiss of me, Mr. Speaker, if I end without, as I said earlier, to try to just give them, I know I have about 10 more minutes, to try to give the opposition members a tour, Mr. Speaker, a quick tour of the island, Mr. Speaker, because I listen to them both here in the House, in Parliament, and on the platform, and they speak like nothing is happening around the country, Mr. Speaker. And I think probably, as I said, they probably need to leave wherever they spend time with and move around, Mr. Speaker. So I'll just give them a quick turn, and feel free, the respective members of Parliament for the areas, to help if there's anything that I miss. I'm only speaking from what I know. We could start in the south, Mr. Speaker. And I need to go to look, Mr. Speaker, at as I mentioned earlier, the bridges, Mr. Speaker, that we constructed post Erica and Maria, Mr. Speaker, to reestablish connection within the Bagatelle Fosse area. They need to look at the playing field and refurbish basketball court in Bagatelle. The new health center in Bagatelle, Mr. Speaker. They need to go to Bagatelle to look at these things. They can move to Stowe Estate, Mr. Speaker, where I just mentioned the $600,000 breakwater that we built to facilitate the landing of the fishermen. And they can speak to myself or the Honorable Vince Henderson as to our plans, our future plans for this area. We can move to we don't move to Granby, because from Stowe we don't move to Granby, and then we move to the rest of my constituency. And they can see the 30-something apartments, Honorable MP? 30-something apartments right next to the Petro Secondary School, Mr. Speaker. They can go to Thetburn and speak to the MP, Mr. Speaker, to speak about the plans of the new Thetburn Primary School. They can go to the soon-to-be named Edward Regis, Mr. Speaker, primary school, where we spent a few $1 million, Mr. Speaker, on remodeling this primary school. They can move on to Pichley and speak to the sports committee in Pichley, Mr. Speaker, as to the investment we've done in sports in the Pichley community, Mr. Speaker. Well, to Bellevue, Mr. Speaker, speaks for itself. Of the almost 400 plus homes that we build there, Mr. Speaker, with the amenities, the new health centers, etc. They move to Soufriere from the P7 County. They can go to Soufriere and speak to the two wonderful jetties that the Honorable Dennis Charles built there, Mr. Speaker. The new health center in Scottset, Soufriere, in Soufriere, Mr. Speaker. The new home that we did in Pori, Mr. Speaker, in Point Michel. And the two new housing development that she has there, Mr. Speaker, ongoing. They can visit Jungle Bay while there, Mr. Speaker, and to look at what some of our CBI funding have done in Jungle Bay, Mr. Speaker. We move to Rosa South. The new health center, Mr. Speaker, in Rosa South, and the new housing that she has ongoing in the Egliston constituency, Mr. Speaker. And I'm just touching a few of the projects, Mr. Speaker. To move to Roseau, go to the Riverside, what do you call it? River Breeze. City Breeze apartment, Mr. Speaker, in the city of Roseau. And talk to the very passionate Mr. Speaker, member of Parliament for Roseau, and listen to the plan, Mr. Speaker, and project that he has done and planned for the Roseau constituency, Mr. Speaker. Yeah. Drive up the hard courts, the courts, Mr. Speaker, the four courts at the Windsor Park, Mr. Speaker. The millions of dollars spent on repairing the Windsor Park Sports Stadium. And we heard the commentators, Mr. Speaker, speak to that, Mr. Speaker, that the condition of this stadium post Maria, they were marveling, Mr. Speaker, at our recovery. Millions of dollars spent on repairing this stadium. Drive up the back road to the Dominica China Friendship Hospital. I'm not sure if Danny has visited there, sorry. The member of Parliament for the Roseau North. And take an extensive tour, Mr. Speaker. Look at the quality of work, Mr. Speaker, and all of the multi-million-dollar pieces of modern equipment that we have in here. The Brenda Strafford Cycling that we spoke about recently. They can go down to Massac, Mr. Speaker, Fouquet Field Massac, and to look at the at the only covered, Mr. Speaker, basketball court, Mr. Speaker, on Island. To Maho, to the new health center, and right next to the health center, Mr. Speaker, the multi-million-dollar new Maho Primary School, Mr. Speaker. I'm good right next to Jimmy to speak to the disaster center, Mr. Speaker. What do they call it? The emergency, regional emergency shelter, Mr. Speaker. I think that's the official name in Jimmy. Millions of dollars spent there, Mr. Speaker. Move to Corley Ho and the rest of the constituency, Mr. Speaker. And talk of the new health centers, the housing in Platma Pier. And what's more, Mr. Speaker, Georgetown, the health centers, and Kempinski Hotel, Mr. Speaker, the work done at the Carbridge, the new health center being built in the Honorable Osh's constituency, and all of the housing being done, Mr. Speaker, in the Vickers constituency, and resource centers, Mr. Speaker, and hard cuts. Mr. Speaker, only then, well, yes, and Canada, Mr. Speaker, the new that the Minister of Tourism spoke about in Canada, right? Yeah, Canada, Mr. Speaker, the extreme north of the island. We move across to Marigot, Mr. Speaker. To pay Bush, we also have, before the new health center being done in Anzi Bay, Mr. Speaker. And we moved to Marigot, we are not one, but two health facilities were done right in the middle of the constituency of the leader of the parliamentary opposition, Mr. Speaker. And I recall, Mr. Speaker, as you rightly said, I remember that back in the days before the health center was built, of course, we know the issues that resulted in all of this. The building was built maybe in the 1910s or whenever, very old building, and all of the problems that ensued, Mr. Speaker. And I recall back in the days when he was a bit more friendlier, and he used to talk to some of us, he would come to me, we had discussions. I remember the Ministry of Health. As I said, back then he was a lot more friendly. He was a little friendlier back then, and we had discussions, and all of the candle vigils, Mr. Speaker, what they call it, Department of Pewinage? Whatever they call it, Mr. Speaker, all of these protest action, Mr. Speaker, that they tried to instigate when this wasn't done. Have you ever heard the member from Marigot speak about coming to applaud the government for the efforts in not one, but two health facilities within the country? Never, Mr. Speaker. I don't know if you've heard it, but I haven't heard it, Mr. Speaker. We moved to Wesley, where all the wonderful work is going on at Wesley. La Plaine, Grand Forks, Mr. Speaker, new health center, housing in Grand Forks. Give me, Mr. Speaker, not one, but two housing facilities in the La Plaine constituency, a new PAHO, state-of-the-art smart health center in La Plaine, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, if after this tour, and as I said, these are some of the things that I recall off my head, I didn't really take the time to make an extensive list. If after, Mr. Speaker...
One minute?
Yes, that's it, Mr. Speaker, I'm fine. If after this, Mr. Speaker, only then I think they might maybe relent on their cliched diatribe and that they dispute every day. Mr. Speaker, if after this tour of the island that I recommend for them, and after sitting with the respective power reps, Mr. Speaker, where they can be enlightened with the programs and initiatives that we put in place for our constituents, they still will not relent, Mr. Speaker. Trust me, Mr. Speaker, there's no hope for them. If Pani J is by you, Mr. Speaker, interpret it, there's no hope for them. Mr. Speaker, I'd like everyone to stay safe during this long holiday weekend. It's a long holiday festive weekend, long one, lots of activities and events. Fete St. Anne now, Cadas Lipso, and of course, admonishing our folks, if you drink, please don't drive, and if you drive in, please don't drink, and let's all find peaceful ways, Mr. Speaker, to settle our differences so we can have an incident-free weekend. Thank you very much for listening to me. Thank you very much.
Mr. Speaker, I move that this Honorable House be suspended until 3 p.m. this afternoon.
It has been moved and seconded that the House be suspended until 3 p.m. this afternoon. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. House stands suspended until 3 p.m. this afternoon.